Chapter 3499. 3 days later. Tianyi Palace was like a shooting star as it sped through the clouds. Ever since they got rid of the 100 refinement ancient sex deity kings, the past 3 days had been peaceful. At this moment, Jiang Tianyi, who was lying in the corner of the hall, gradually woke up. His consciousness was still recovering, and he opened his eyes in a daze. What entered his eyes was a handsome and resolute face. His expression was calm and his eyes were as deep as the night sky. Jiang Tianyi was stunned for a moment. He moved his lips and said in a hoarse voice, "Young Master Tianqing. You helped me heal my injuries and woke me up." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Your injuries are no longer a problem. You should be able to recover after a few more months of recuperation." "Thank you, young Master Tianqing." Jiang Tianyi was filled with gratitude and quickly thanked him. Then, he thought of something important and asked, "Young Master Tianqing, Qin Dong and Chen Lan. Where are the 100 refinement ancient sex people?" Ji Tianqing shook his head and replied calmly, "I got rid of them 3 days ago. They should be chasing after us now." "You got rid of them?" Jiang Tianyi was in disbelief and asked subconsciously, "There are 6 of them and 2 of them are high-level deity kings. Especially Qin Dong, he has broken through to the 8th degree realm. How did you get rid of them?" Thinking of this, he shook his head, which was still a little dizzy. The memories from 3 days ago gradually became clearer. He vaguely remembered that before he lost consciousness, Ji Tianqing said 2 sentences. It was those 2 sentences that made Qin Dong and the 100 refinement ancient sex people feel as though they had seen a ghost. Then, without waiting for Ji Tianqing to show himself, Qin Dong and the others fled for their lives. Thinking of this, Jiang Tianyi found it even more unbelievable and was filled with doubts. Ji Tianqing did not explain and only said in a low voice, "Your injuries are lighter and you will recover soon." But Jiang Tianqing's injuries, when Jiang Tianqing was mentioned, Jiang Tianyi's heart tightened. He quickly turned his head and looked around, looking for Jiang Tianqing. "Where is 9th brother? How was his situation? I remember that he was seriously injured and his right arm was cut off by that bastard Qin Dong." Jiang Tianqing was already seriously injured. After his right arm was cut off, it affected his ability to wield his sword and cast spells. This was definitely a heavy blow to Jiang Tianqing. Ji Tianqing patted Jiang Tianyi's shoulder and comforted him, "I can understand your feelings. Jiang Tianyi's injuries are indeed too severe. However, you don't have to worry too much. His life is not in danger. I've already suppressed his injuries, but his severed arm can't be reattached in a short period of time." When he returned to the divine attraction heavenly abode, the Jiang clan would have plenty of divine pellets and elixirs to help him recover. However, if he wants to recover to his peak state, he will need at least 10 years. After hearing this, Jiang Tianyi felt slightly comforted. He cupped his hands towards Ji Tianqing and said, "Then I will thank young Master Tianqing on behalf of 9th brother. Furthermore, I will report this matter to the Patriarch." Of course he had to report such a big matter to the Patriarch. Firstly, he was grateful to Ji Tianqing for saving his life and hoped that the Jiang clan would give him a corresponding gift and courtesy. Secondly, he wanted the experts of the Jiang clan to help him take revenge. Ji Tianqing nodded and didn't say anything else. "All right, if you have nothing else to do, you can go and see Jiang Tianqing." After speaking, Ji Tianqing returned to the center of the hall and sat down. He closed his eyes and rested while controlling the palace's divine formation. Even though the divine formation was operating automatically and the palace of heavens flew straight to the southwest like a divine ship. Even if Ji Tianqing didn't control the formation for a long time, it wouldn't affect him. However, he still had to keep an eye on the divine formation's operation and monitor the movements within tens of thousands of miles around the palace in case of an emergency. Jiang Tianyi sat up from the ground and used his divine power to clean off the blood on his body before walking towards the secret room. There was a passageway in the corner of the hall that connected to several secret rooms. He opened the door to the last secret room and entered to see Jiang Tianqing. The situation was as Ji Tianqing had said. Jiang Tianqing's injuries had stabilized, but he was still unconscious. He lay in the divine formation and was enveloped by divine light. The healing divine formation operated automatically and continuously nourished Jiang Tianqing. Seeing this, Jiang Tianyi heaved a sigh of relief and turned to leave the secret room. This place isn't far from the divine attraction grotto heaven. Young Master Tianqing should know the way. I'll let him control the palace. I'll go into seclusion to heal for a few days. Thinking this, Jiang Tianyi entered his secret room and consumed a divine pill to heal his injuries. Unknowingly, half a month passed. At this time, the Palace of Heavens had already entered the south wind region and was flying high in the sky. It was only 2 days away from the divine attraction grotto heaven. Jiang Tianyi finished his half-month-long recuperation and walked out of the secret room. At this time, his external injuries had been treated and he didn't seem to have any abnormalities. However, his internal injuries still needed to be treated and his strength was still weak. He only had 40% of his peak strength. He spread out his divine sense and observed the surroundings. Chapter 3500. Unfortunately, no matter how much Jiang Tianyi asked, Ji Tianqing only smiled and did not say anything. He did not mention a single word about what happened back then. Jiang Tianyi could only give up. Since he had nothing to do, he took out his communication jade slip and sent a message to the Jiang clan's elder and his 2 elder brothers. Also, he contacted his friend in the Shimi Grotto Heaven to ask about the recent situation. After all, he had been in seclusion for half a month and did not know what was going on outside. He was sure that the Shadow Executioner Envoy and the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect would not let this go. After sending the message, he waited silently. After about 15 minutes, Jiang Tianyi received the first message. This message was from his friend in the Shimi Grotto Heaven. When Jiang Tianyi read the message in the jade slip, his expression froze. His relaxed expression was replaced by a heavy feeling, followed by a deep worry and shock. Even his hands, which were holding the jade slip, started to tremble slightly. Seeing the change in his expression, Ji Tianqing frowned and asked, "What happened?" Jiang Tianyi put away the jade slip and took a deep breath. He said in a low voice, "Young Master Tianqing, the Shadow Executioner Envoy brought more than 20 divine kings to the south to kill us. According to my friend, they have already entered the south wind region and their target is the God's attraction grotto heaven." Ji Tianqing nodded and said calmly, "Xing Xiang and Ku Yun were killed by me, so the Shadow Executioner Envoy will not let this go. Of course, he will continue to chase us. Their speed is quite fast and they are very smart. They know that they can't catch up to us, so they went straight to the God's attraction grotto heaven. However, this is not a big deal. It is within my expectations." Jiang Tianyi was silent for a moment before continuing, "However, these are not the only people chasing us. It is said that this matter has spread to all the major regions and has also alarmed the patrol commander. It seems like the vice commander of the patrol envoy has personally come out of the mountains and brought a few patrol envoys to chase after us." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows. "The patrol commander? That should be the Azura God Emperor's right-hand man, right?" Jiang Tianyi nodded and said, "That's right. Ordinary inspectors were not qualified to have an audience with the Azura God Emperor. Above them were 2 commanders. Mr. Tianqing, the vice commander of the patrol envoy, Jin Shuang, brought several patrol envoys. Divine envoy Zhaning also brought more than 20 divine kings. With so many divine king powerhouses gathered together, I'm afraid that no one can withstand it." Jiang Tianyi looked worried and anxious. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was as indifferent as ever. "They're just a bunch of mobs. As long as it's not the Shura God Emperor himself, what's there to fear?" Hearing his words, Jiang Tianyi was taken aback for a moment. He couldn't help but have a thought. Over 30 Divine King powerhouses, and there are even quite a few high-level Divine Kings among them. Young Master Tianqing is actually not worried at all. Could he be the Kenshin from back then, but had been hiding his strength? If that was the case, then it made sense. After all, Lord Kenshin was a peak god king. Other than the Azura god emperor, no one is his match. Just as Jiang Tianyi was silently pondering, another ray of divine light flew over from the sky. Swoosh! Another communication jade slip landed in front of him. Jiang Tianyi hurriedly picked up the communication jade slip. Seeing the symbol on the jade slip, he explained, "This is a message from my fourth brother. Let me take a look first." Finished speaking, he used his divine sense to enter it and read the message inside. However, 10 breaths later, his brows furrowed tightly, and his expression became somewhat strange. Ji Tianqing looked at him and asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen to the Jiang clan?" Jiang Tianyi shook his head and said, "Nothing happened. It's still as calm as ever." However, the Jiang clan has already received news that Divine Envoy Zhaning and a large group of domain lords are about to head to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven. The entire Jiang clan is on the verge of facing a great enemy. The atmosphere is very tense. Fourth brother said that ninth brother and I have made a huge mistake and should try our best not to return to the Jiang clan. He told us to hide outside for a while and wait for the news to die down before returning. Ji Tianqing frowned and thought to himself, back then, the various ancient clans stood at the peak of the god realm. How arrogant and prideful they were. Who would have thought that under the rule of the Azura god emperor, they would become so servile? Seeing Ji Tianqing remain silent, Jiang Tianyi hurriedly advised, "Young Master Tianqing, don't think too much. This is actually nothing. After all, I didn't report your true identity to the Patriarch and the Elders. I originally planned to give them a surprise. Since they are so worried, I will send a message to them now and explain the situation to them. Don't worry, as long as the Patriarch and the Elders know that you are here, they will definitely welcome you with the warmest welcome." Jiang Tianyi took out the communication jade slip and was about to send a message to the Jiang clan. Ji Tianqing hurriedly waved his hand to stop him. He frowned and thought for a moment, then said in a serious tone, "Jiang Tianyi, times have changed. The current situation is very complicated. I'm afraid I can't return to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven with you. You should also know that I have already formed a grudge with the Azura God Emperor by killing several domain lords and divine envoys. If I return to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven with you, it will definitely bring disaster to the Jiang clan." Jiang Tianyi shook his head without hesitation and advised, "Young Master Tianqing, you must not have such thoughts. You are the Jiang clan's great benefactor. No matter what the current situation is, the Jiang clan will always remember your kindness. As long as you go to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven, the Jiang clan will do their best to protect you. Even if Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner and the other domain lords go, they won't be able to do anything to the Jiang clan. Moreover, the 18 ancient clans have formed an alliance to resist the Azura God Emperor's rule. Currently, the Azura God Emperor's power is not stable yet. It is impossible for him to wage war against the Jiang clan. Once the Azura God Emperor makes a move against the Jiang clan, the 18 ancient clans will join forces to resist. The Azura God Emperor will definitely not be able to bear the consequences. A long time ago, when Ji Tianqing killed several domain lords and was pursued by Star Aspect Divine Envoy, Jiang Tianyi knew that this matter was of great importance. He also knew that Ji Tianqing was rebelling against the Azura God Emperor. However, he did not stop or oppose. In fact, he even helped Ji Tianqing. This was because he knew that the 18 ancient clans and the Azura God Emperor were also enemies. To the Jiang clan, Ji Tianqing was someone they could completely trust. At the same time, he also knew the severity of the situation. He was certain that the Azura God Emperor would not dare to wage war against the ancient clans. Ji Tianqing still wanted to say something. However, Jiang Tianyi repeatedly persuaded him with sincerity. Moreover, they were only 2 days away from the divine attraction grotto heaven. After much consideration, Ji Tianqing listened to Jiang Tianyi's advice and agreed to return to the Jiang clan with him. After all, Ji Tianqing also wanted to see how the Jiang clan had developed. What was the relationship and situation between the Jiang clan and the Azura God Emperor? In the future, when he fought against the Azura God Emperor, would the Jiang clan help him? Chapter 35:01. 2 days passed quickly. That evening, the Palace of Heavens landed in a majestic mountain range and flew into a deep canyon. This smoky canyon was the entrance to the God's Guide Grotto Heaven. On the surface, there was nothing unusual about the canyon. However, the door to the God's Guide Grotto Heaven was hidden between the cliffs. The door to the Palace of Heavens opened. Jiang Tianyi stepped out of the hall and stood at the door. He looked around and saw that the canyon was quiet and empty. His gaze landed on the cliffs and a gratified smile appeared on his face. It seems that nothing has happened to the Jiang clan. Those divine envoys and domain lords haven't arrived yet. This made Jiang Tianyi's hanging heart fall back into his stomach. He didn't waste any more time. He formed a seal with both hands and released divine power to form a seal. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Mysterious and special seals were imprinted on the cliffs one after another. Soon, the ordinary-looking brown cliff lit up with a dazzling white light. When Jiang Tianyi finished casting the seal, a blazing white spatial door appeared. Whoosh! The 3-meter-tall spatial door emitted surging divine power and connected to the God's Guide Grotto Heaven. I'm back. This time, I've made such a great contribution that everyone will look at me differently. Jiang Tianyi clenched his fists and revealed an expectant look. He was about to put away the palace and step through the spatial door to enter the God's Guide Grotto Heaven. At this moment, the spatial gate rippled with divine power, and a few figures walked out of it. The leader was a white-haired middle-aged God clan member about 50 years old. He wore a luxurious divine crown and wore a purple-gold robe. He also held a scepter in his hand. Jiang Tianyi was no stranger. This was the Jiang clan's current clan leader, Jiang Chuyun. Behind Jiang Chuyun, there were 5 elders in purple robes. 2 of them had aged faces, while the other 3 were middle-aged men. In addition, there were 2 God King experts with imposing auras and cold faces. They also followed Jiang Chuyun. They were the Jiang clan's left and right protectors. Seeing these 8 experts appear, Jiang Tianyi was stunned. He couldn't help but think, strange, how did the patriarch, protector, and elders know I'm back? Could it be that they had already gathered together and were waiting for me to return? But I haven't told them that I found the benefactor of the Jiang clan. With that in mind, Jiang Tianyi couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart and hurriedly stepped into the sky to greet him. Tianyi greets the patriarch, the left and right protectors, and the elders. Jiang Tianyi stood in the sky and bowed to Jiang Chusheng and the others, respectfully saying. However, Jiang Chusheng, the Dharma protectors, and the elders all looked at him with complicated expressions, but no one told him to get up. Everyone's expressions and eyes were filled with disappointment and indignation. The atmosphere was rather strange. Jiang Tianyi vaguely felt that something was wrong. He raised his head to look at Jiang Chusheng and the others and asked, Patriarch, how did you know that disciple has returned? Although ninth brother and I have made contributions, we shouldn't have troubled the elders to come to the entrance to welcome us. Jiang Chusheng looked at him expressionlessly and said in a low voice, when you contacted fourth brother, the elders and I calculated the time and knew that you would return today. Jiang Tianyi, why didn't you listen to fourth brother's advice? Ah! Jiang Tianyi was stunned. He remembered fourth brother's warning to him to hide outside for a while and not return to the Jiang clan. Thinking of this, Jiang Tianyi felt even more that something was wrong. He asked, Patriarch, what happened? Don't ask. Jiang Chuxing said expressionlessly, let Jiang Tianqing out and the two blacksmithing geniuses you recruited. Jiang Tianyi was a little nervous. Ninth brother is seriously injured and is still unconscious. Before he could finish, the left protector said expressionlessly, bring him out. We will deal with him. Jiang Tianyi didn't dare to disobey. He hurriedly took out the unconscious Jiang Tianqing from Tianyi Palace. Of course, Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang also left the palace and appeared in the sky. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were cultivating when they suddenly appeared in the sky. They were stunned when they saw several godly king experts in front of them. The two were stunned for a moment before realizing that these were the godly king experts of the Jiang clan. They hurriedly bowed. However, Jiang Chuyun, the left and right protectors, and the elders directly ignored them. Third elder, send them back to the Jiang clan. Jiang Chuyun waved his scepter and ordered. The two elders in purple robes acknowledged the order and hurriedly carried the unconscious Jiang Tianqing. Together with Lin Zhen and the battle dragon elephant, they stepped into the space gate. Seeing this, Jiang Tianyi felt that the atmosphere was even weirder. Jiang Chuyun said expressionlessly, Jiang Tianqing recruited two blacksmithing geniuses from the Hengshan Empire to replenish the Jiang clan with new blood. This is a great merit. However, you, Jiang Tianyi, you have disappointed us too much. Not only did you fail to complete your mission, but you have also brought disaster to the Jiang clan. Tell me, how should you be punished? Jiang Chuyun's tone was dignified. His face was filled with anger as he stared sharply at Jiang Tianyi. The left and right protectors and the four elders also looked at him with disappointment and indignation. This. Jiang Tianyi was stunned. He had thought many times about how the Jiang clan would welcome and reward him when he returned to the divine attraction grotto heaven. However, he never expected that the clan leader would bring the protectors and elders to denounce him outside the entrance. He hurriedly explained, Clan leader, please calm down. I know that I helped young Master Tianqing fight against the patrolling god envoys and angered several god envoys and domain lords. I might even have angered the Azura god emperor. I shouldn't have done anything and brought disaster to the Jiang clan for no reason. However, do you know who that young Master Tianqing is? You will never be able to guess his true identity. When he said this, Jiang Tianyi kept them in suspense and revealed a mysterious smile. Unexpectedly. Jiang Chuyun and the protectors and elders were not interested in this at all. Instead, they were even angrier and expected better from Jiang Tianyi. Bastard! Jiang Chuyun shouted angrily and reprimanded with a dignified expression, you brought disaster to the Jiang clan, but you still don't know how to repent. How disappointing! Jiang Tianyi, the Jiang clan must have treated you too well for you to be so complacent. The right protector also reprimanded with a cold expression, Jiang Tianyi, the young Master Tianqing you speak of not only brutally killed several domain lords, but also two god envoys. This is a challenge to the Azura god emperor, a traitor who goes against the orthodoxy of the god emperor. As a disciple of the Jiang clan, it's fine if you don't punish the traitor, but you actually collude with the traitor? Has the Jiang clan taught and nurtured you for so many years all gone down the drain? Although the left protector and the elders didn't say anything, Jiang Tianyi saw their expressions and knew that they had the same thoughts. Instantly, Jiang Tianyi's hot-bloodedness cooled down. His heart was filled with deep disappointment and astonishment. He had never expected that the once proud and unyielding Jiang clan elder would become like this. Chapter 3502. Disappointment. Heartache. Jiang Tianyi's gaze swept across the patriarch, the left and right protectors, and the elders, and he felt a deep sense of loss. Ha ha ha, all this time, the patriarch and the elders have taught us to never forget our identity. We are one of the noblest bloodlines in the world, inherited from the ancient times. No matter who it is, even the Azura god emperor who rules the boundless heaven continent, don't even think about making us bow our heads. The Jiang clan's disciples would rather die standing than live kneeling. These words were taught to me by all of you. Jiang Tianyi sneered and shook his head. But now, the Azura God Emperor hasn't said anything, and only 2 divine envoys were killed. How can you react like this? Are you afraid? Have you all forgotten what you taught me back then? Jiang Tianyi was no longer as docile and respectful as before. He had become somewhat deranged. He actually criticized the patriarch, the left and right protectors, and the elders in front of them. Anger appeared on everyone's faces, and their eyes flashed coldly. Jiang Tianyi. Are you crazy? How dare you speak to the patriarch like this? How dare you contradict the patriarch in front of everyone? Jiang Tianyi, you're too daring and unrestrained. You unfilial son, who gave you the courage to criticize us? Jiang Tianyi, we're doing this for your own good. How can you not understand our good intentions? Apologize to the patriarch and accept your punishment. The left and right protectors and the elders were furious and began to reprimand Jiang Tianyi. 4th elder was the closest to him and hurriedly urged him to admit his guilt. However, Jiang Tianyi smiled bitterly and said in a mocking tone, I didn't do anything wrong, so why should I admit my guilt? Unless you're doing this on purpose for the divine envoys to see. Jiang Tianyi wasn't stupid. He had already seen through the patriarch, protectors, and elders' attitudes. He even suspected that divine envoy Shadow Executioner and the divine kings had already contacted the Jiang clan. Jiang Chuyun's face darkened, and he shouted coldly, Bastard! Jiang Tianyi, don't blame me for being merciless for your stubbornness. You've repeatedly violated the clan's rules. I'm going to execute the clan's rules right now and punish you severely. I'll punish you by sending you to the torture hall and handing you 300 soul-severing whips. Then, you'll be sent to Icebound Cliff to reflect on your mistakes in isolation for 500 years. Great Elder, take him down. Jiang Chuyun didn't waste any more words with Jiang Tianyi. She convicted him in front of everyone and sentenced him to punishment. Following his order, the 1st elder in charge of the disciplinary hall immediately stepped towards Jiang Tianyi and was about to capture him. Seeing this, Jiang Tianyi hurriedly retreated and retorted loudly, 300 soul-severing whips. Thrown into Icebound Cliff for 500 years. What kind of heinous crime have I committed to deserve such a severe punishment? Such a severe punishment had not appeared in the Jiang clan for hundreds of years. This punishment was second only to betraying the clan. However, Jiang Chuyun, the guardians, and the elders had no intention of explaining or pleading for leniency. Jiang Tianyi couldn't escape the great elder's capture. Furthermore, with the patriarch and the left and right protectors present, there was no way he could escape. At this critical juncture, he could only roar with grief and indignation. Originally, I brought young Master Tianqing back to give you all a surprise. However, now that things have come to this, I can only let him meet you in advance. As he spoke, he used his divine sense to contact Ji Tianqing in the palace. Seeing that the great elder was unmoved and pounced over with a cold expression, Jiang Tianyi hurriedly dodged and continued, Didn't you all say that 1,100 years ago, when our clan was in danger, a white-robed young master came to save the Jiang clan? All the Jiang clan disciples are grateful for that young master's kindness and treat him as the Jiang clan's second parent. We will never forget him. Now, the Jiang clan's benefactor has returned. When he said the last sentence, Jiang Tianyi almost roared it out. As his voice fell, the palace of heavens was absorbed into his body. In the air behind him, a white-robed, black-haired, and black-eyed human youth appeared out of thin air. It was Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood proudly with his hands behind his back, looking at the Jiang clan with a calm expression. An invisible divine pressure spread out from his body and enveloped the entire canyon. Instantly, the great elder who captured Ji Tianqing froze on the spot when he saw Ji Tianqing's appearance. The patriarch Jiang Chuyun, the right protector, and the 4 elders also looked as if they had seen a ghost. They stared at Ji Tianqing, completely petrified. The canyon was dead silent. Everyone was dumbfounded and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Seeing this, Jiang Tianyi smiled and said, "Patriarch, left and right protectors, elders, I am not stupid. If young Master Tianqing was not the Jiang clan's benefactor, why would I help him and bring him back to the Jiang clan? Not only am I not wrong, but I have also contributed." Jiang Tianyi's voice broke the silence. Jiang Chuyun, the left and right protectors, and the elders immediately came back to their senses and burst into a discussion. Heavens! It really is him, he actually came back. Didn't the sword god perish in outer space a long time ago and turn into ashes? How could he come back from the dead? I really can't believe this is real. Maybe this person only looks like Kenshin and is not the real Kenshin. Everyone could not accept this result. Jiang Chuyun released his divine sense and carefully observed Ji Tianqing. His expression became extremely complicated. His appearance and appearance are 80% similar, but the aura of his divine sense is exactly the same. He should be Kenshin. But Kenshin died in front of tens of thousands of gods. How could he come back from the dead? Moreover, his strength seems to have dropped a lot. He is only a middle divine king. What is going on? At this moment, Ji Tianqing looked at Jiang Chuyun with a playful smile. Jiang Chuyun, I trust you have been well since we last met. Jiang Chuyun's body stiffened, and his expression became even more complicated. He stiffly raised his hands and saluted. Senior Kenshin, is it really you? Ji Tianqing smiled but did not say anything. He looked at the elders, a middle-aged man with dark skin and a thin figure. Jiang Chusheng, after 1,000 years, you don't even salute me? The middle-aged man called Jiang Chusheng was the second elder of the Jiang clan. At the same time, he was also one of Kenshin's in-name disciples. Back then, Kenshin saved him and Jiang Chushaon stayed in the Jiang clan for half a year. Jiang Chusheng and Jiang Chushao thought of all sorts of ways to curry favor with Kenshin and shamelessly followed him, wanting to be his disciple. Kenshin had no choice but to accept them as in-name disciples. There were many such in-name disciples all over the God realm and the Dragon realm. Jiang Chusheng only came back to his senses after being called out by Kenshin. His expression was rather awkward. He hurriedly walked out of the crowd and bowed to Ji Tianqing. He said respectfully, "Disciple Jiang Chusheng greets Master. It is not that disciple is rude, but Master, your resurrection is too shocking." Chapter 3503. At this moment, everyone in the Jiang clan recalled the peerless grace of Kenshin 1,100 years ago. Those scenes of mountains and rivers collapsing and the sun and moon falling were unforgettable. The reverence engraved in the depths of their souls emerged again. Even though Kenshin had come back from the dead and his strength had dropped. But Jiang Chuyun, the guardians, and the elders were all in awe of Ji Tianqing and didn't dare to act rashly. Ji Tianqing didn't say anything else. Jiang Chuyun, the guardians, and the elders all had complicated expressions. Their eyes were filled with hesitation and struggle. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little awkward, Jiang Tianyi took the initiative to shout, "Clan leader, guardians, and elders, Lord Kenshin's return today is a joyous occasion. Let's not stand here. Let's go back to the Jiang clan and host a banquet to avoid neglecting our esteemed guest." Jiang Tianyi wanted to resolve the awkwardness. But as soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Chuyun, the left guardian, and the others all glared at him with obvious warning. Jiang Tianyi was stunned. He was a little stunned and confused. Ji Tianqing saw everyone's reaction and already had an answer in his heart. He looked at Jiang Chuyun with a playful smile on the corner of his mouth and asked, "Looks like after 1,000 years, things have changed. Jiang Chuyun, if I'm not wrong, the Shadow Executioner envoy has been here?" Jiang Chuyun was speechless. He hesitated and didn't know how to answer. Ji Tianqing nodded and continued, "It seems that you don't welcome my arrival. Since the Jiang clan has bowed to the Azura God Emperor, I won't force you. The world is long, we'll meet again." After that, Ji Tianqing cupped his hands at everyone and turned to leave. Jiang Tianyi quickly caught up with Ji Tianqing and urged him to stay. "Young Master Tianqing, please wait. Maybe it's not what you think. Maybe the clan leader and the elders just haven't come back to their senses yet." Before Jiang Tianyi could finish, the right guardian scolded, "Jiang Tianyi, you are now a criminal. Don't you dare make decisions without permission." The right protector's reaction undoubtedly confirmed Ji Tianqing's words. Jiang Tianyi stood rooted to the ground, instantly understanding everything. Looking at Ji Tianqing's back, he was speechless and didn't know how to persuade him to stay. But at this moment, the spatial door on the cliff lit up with white light again, sending out ripples of divine power. Shwa! Light and shadow flashed. A tall and sturdy figure stepped out of the spatial door and arrived in the sky. This person was the Shadow Executioner. He smiled as he looked at Ji Tianqing's back. With a complacent look, he sneered and said, "I've been waiting for you here for a long time. Now that you're here, you still want to leave?" Suddenly seeing the Shadow Executioner, Jiang Tianyi's eyes widened, revealing a look of disbelief. He looked at the Patriarch, the Protectors, and the Elders. Then, he looked at the Shadow Executioner God Emissary. His expression turned ugly. You actually, tens of thousands of feet away." Ji Tianqing also stopped and turned to look at the Shadow Executioner God Emissary. Seeing the Shadow Executioner God Emissary appear, he only raised his eyebrows and didn't reveal a look of surprise. "I guessed right," Ji Tianqing murmured. Looking at Jiang Chuyun and the Jiang clan, he gently shook his head and said, "You've all changed. I'm very disappointed." Although his emotions were very calm and his tone was very indifferent. When everyone heard this, their heartstrings tightened and they revealed a look of deep shame. Jiang Chuyun hurriedly bowed and said in a sincere tone, "Senior, you're magnanimous. Please don't vent your anger on the Jiang clan disciples. This is my decision. If you want to blame someone, blame it on me. For the long-term stability of the Jiang clan, I can only compromise. Please understand." "Ha!" Ji Tianqing sneered contemptuously and said in an indifferent tone, "There's nothing to understand. This is your way of survival. No one can force it." Jiang Chuyun was full of guilt and his cheeks were burning. He didn't dare to look at Ji Tianqing's eyes. He turned to look at the Shadow Executioner God Emissary and said expressionlessly, "Lord Emissary, my clan can only do this. The rest has nothing to do with us. The Jiang clan disciples have no obligation to help you capture people. At the same time, you can't make a move in the Jiang clan's territory." The Shadow Executioner God Emissary nodded and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I'll definitely abide by the agreement and won't make things difficult for you. Moreover, I have more than enough people to deal with this Lord Kenshin who came back from the dead." Obviously, the Shadow Executioner God Emissary had heard the conversation between Ji Tianqing and the Jiang clan. When he learned that Ji Tianqing was the former Kenshin, he was so excited that his blood boiled. Even if he used his toes to think, he knew that as long as he captured Ji Tianqing and handed him over to the Azura God Emperor, it would definitely be a great merit. After all, the Shadow Executioner God Emissary still knew a little about the Great War of the Gods 1,000 years ago. At least he knew that Kenshin was the Azura God Emperor's mortal enemy. The spatial door flashed with white light again and fluctuated with spatial energy. Swish 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 swish. One figure after another stepped out of the spatial door and arrived in the sky above the canyon. In a short moment, 24 God King experts appeared in front of everyone. Among these God King experts, there were 9 domain lords. Other than the 4 domain lords who were high god kings, the other 20 were intermediate god kings. With such a powerful and terrifying team, even if they faced a peak god king, they still had the power to fight. Dealing with Ji Tianqing was simply too easy. The shadow executioner god emissary had a confident attitude and a proud smile hung on his face. He said to Jiang Chuyun, there's nothing for you to do here. Bring the Jiang clan people back. Then, he ordered the 24 god kings, all god kings listen to my order. Use all your strength to capture Kenshin. You must capture him alive. Vice Commander Lord Jin Shuang will arrive soon. When the time comes, we will present this great gift to Lord Jin Shuang. Before knowing Ji Tianqing's true identity, the shadow executioner god emissary's goal was to kill him. But now, the shadow executioner god emissary changed his mind. The 24 god kings all drew their swords and grinned coldly, about to join forces to attack Ji Tianqing. At this time, Jiang Chuyun suddenly shouted coldly with a dignified expression, "Stop. This seat won't interfere with your grudges, but this canyon is the Jiang clan's territory. If you want to fight, please leave this canyon. Otherwise, the Jiang clan absolutely won't sit idly by." The moment these words came out, the shadow executioner god emissary's expression became very ugly. Clearly, Jiang Chuyun still wanted to help Ji Tianqing. But the shadow executioner god emissary also understood that with his status, the Jiang clan did not place him in their eyes at all. Unless Lord Jin Shuang was present, only then would the Jiang clan be apprehensive. Hence, the shadow executioner god emissary transmitted his order to the many god kings, surround Kenshin and follow him out of the canyon. But very unfortunately, the 24 god kings were just about to disperse when Ji Tianqing's entire body lit up with white light, and he disappeared into thin air. The afterimage that was left on the spot also rapidly disappeared. The shadow executioner god emissary's expression changed, and he immediately waved his hand to give the order. He escaped. Quickly chase. No matter what, we must catch him. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3504. Ji Tianqing's decisive escape was within everyone's expectations. After all, the Jiang clan had submitted to the Azura god emperor. It was clear that they would not accept or help him. Shadow Executioner led more than 20 god kings, sharpening their swords and brimming with killing intent. In addition, Jin Shuang, the vice commander of the patrol, led a team of divine envoys. They could arrive at God's Guide Grotto Heaven at any time. Under such circumstances, Ji Tianqing had no choice but to escape. But Shadow Executioner and the others did not expect Ji Tianqing to escape so decisively. A moment ago, he was still standing in the sky, motionless. The next moment, he directly used a teleportation secret technique and escaped from God's Guide Grotto Heaven. Swoosh! A divine light flashed. Ji Tianqing left God's Guide Grotto Heaven and teleported 60,000 miles away. Shadow Executioner and the other Zone Lord's divine senses could detect a radius of 70,000 miles. They discovered that Ji Tianqing had escaped to the south of God's Guide Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianqing also took out a pitch-black divine sword and rode it to the south. Whoosh! He was like an aurora cutting across the sky, piercing through the firmament and disappearing into the sea of clouds. Shadow Executioner and the 20 god kings did not hesitate. They all used their teleportation divine powers and chased south. They left in such a hurry that Shadow Executioner did not even have time to warn Jiang Chuyun. Swoosh! Swoosh! After a divine light flashed, Shadow Executioner and the 20 god kings all teleported 40,000 miles away. However, the distance between them and Ji Tianqing was increasing at an extremely fast speed. The Shadow Executioner emissary made a prompt decision and ordered, Domain Lord Qinglan, steer the divine warship and lead everyone to the south. Qing Kong, Sanhe, Mingluan, 3 Zone Lords, follow me in chase after Kenshin." As he spoke, Shadow Executioner took out the sky-piercing hairpin. The 3 Zone Lords did not dare to hesitate. They quickly followed him into the sky-piercing hairpin and flew south as fast as they could. Azure Blue Zone Lord took out a mid-king level divine ship and took 21 God Kings to the south as fast as lightning. Originally, after the previous experience of killing Ji Tianqing, the Shadow Executioner envoy only brought 3 Domain Lords and did not dare to chase after Ji Tianqing. Reality proved that even if he caught up with Ji Tianqing, he would only be killed by Ji Tianqing. However, the situation this time was different. He knew that he was no match for Ji Tianqing, but he still took out the sky-piercing hairpin without hesitation and took the lead to chase to the south. This was because Ji Tianqing's true identity had been exposed. Kenshin. 1,000 years ago, his name had shaken the 4 continents of the divine realm, and he had suppressed numerous divine kings with a single sword strike. At the same time, he was also the Azura God Emperor's greatest enemy. Therefore, the Shadow Executioner emissary would not let him escape no matter what. Once he let Ji Tianqing escape the boundless heaven continent, he already guessed how the Azura God Emperor would punish him. Of course, the Shadow Executioner emissary had also thought it through. He would just follow Ji Tianqing and make sure that he was not shaken off by Ji Tianqing. He would never fight with Ji Tianqing. That would be courting death. Whoosh! The sky-piercing hairpin cut through the sky, faster than the speed of light, and soon closed the distance with Ji Tianqing. 50,000 miles, 45,000 miles, 40,000 miles, after all, it was a king-level high-grade divine artifact. As long as there was enough divine power to support it, its speed would far exceed the Sword of Burial of Heaven. After 20 breaths of time, the distance between the sky-piercing hairpin and the Sword of Burial of Heaven was shortened to about 10,000 miles. At this time, the Shadow Executioner emissary finally breathed a sigh of relief. He hurriedly said to the 3 Domain Lords, "The 4 of us will take turns to control the sky-piercing hairpin and maintain this speed, hanging behind Kenshin and keeping a distance of 10,000 miles from him. Everyone must remember, don't be shaken off by him, but don't try to intercept him either. With just the 4 of us, we are not his match at all. After all, he has several divine king realm accomplices with him." After saying that, he said to Clear Sky Domain Lord, "Clear Sky, you control the sky-piercing hairpin first. I have to send a message to Lord Jin Shuang and report the latest situation to him." Clear Sky Domain Lord nodded and complied. She hurriedly cast a spell to control the divine array and control the sky-piercing hairpin. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner freed his hand, took out a communication jade slip, and entered a message inside. "Lord Jin Shuang, we rushed to the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven in advance. We wanted to ambush Tianqing there and kill him in one fell swoop. But we didn't expect the Jiang clan to reject him and not let him enter the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven. What was even more unexpected was that Tianqing's true identity was exposed. He turned out to be Kenshin from 1,000 years ago. He once saved the Jiang clan and has a deep relationship with the Jiang clan. Although the Jiang clan didn't help Kenshin, they also didn't assist us in capturing him. Kenshin took the opportunity to escape, and I'm going all out to hunt him down." After entering the message, Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner sent out a communication jade slip. The next step was to wait patiently. About half an hour later, Jin Shuang sent back a communication jade slip. Whoosh! Spiritual light flew into the sky-piercing hairpin and landed in front of Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner. He hurriedly picked up the jade slip and read the message inside. Jin Shuang's voice immediately sounded in his mind. She was very excited and excited. That traitor is Kenshin. So that's how it is. No wonder he was so daring and dared to go against His Majesty the God Emperor and kill innocent people. Kenshin died 1,000 years ago. How could he come back from the dead now? There must be a huge secret hidden here. Shadow Executioner, you've made a great contribution this time. His Majesty the God Emperor will definitely reward you heavily. However, His Majesty the God Emperor isn't in the God Emperor Palace right now. He won't be back anytime soon. However, there's me, Commander Qi Yan, the Meng Shuai, and the Imperial Tutor, will definitely capture Kenshin and hand him over to His Majesty the God Emperor. What you need to do now is to follow him closely. You can't lose him. I'll arrange the entire capture plan. Just wait for my orders. Obviously. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner's report made Jin Shuang's blood boil. She was extremely excited. After reading the message in the jade slip, Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner finally let out a sigh of relief. At the entrance of God Attraction Grotto Heaven, Jiang Tianyi was also stunned. He looked soullessly towards the south. His expression was very complicated. Young Master Tianqing, I'm sorry, I didn't expect it to be like this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. These words kept surging in his mind. The guilt in his heart was about to explode. Along with the guilt, he was also thoroughly disappointed in the Jiang clan. So much so that he suddenly felt disheartened. Ha, this kind of Jiang clan, this kind of ancient clan. What a joke. He muttered to himself, then turned and walked towards the entrance of God Attraction Grotto Heaven. When he passed by Jiang Chuyun, the left and right protectors, and the others, he said expressionlessly, "Don't worry. I'll go to the disciplinary hall to receive my punishment. I'll go to the frozen cliff to reflect on my mistakes." Everyone could tell from his tone that his heart was as dead as ashes. Jiang Chuyun's body shook. She turned and looked at his back. She sighed. Jiang Tianyi. No matter what you're thinking, I'll tell you. The world has changed. If the Jiang clan wants to continue, they must adapt to the times and go with the flow. Even if he was at his peak, didn't he still die in the War of the Gods, let alone now that his cultivation has fallen? The 5 emperors rule the world. The general trend is set. No one can change it. Chapter 3505. The general trend is already set, and no one can change it. Jiang Tianyi muttered to himself as a cold smile appeared on his face. He did not refute, but he did not agree either. The moment he stepped into the spatial door and entered God's Guide Grotto Heaven, he closed his eyes. He muttered in his heart. If this eternal night is like a long night, there will definitely be a star that dispels the darkness. And that most dazzling star will definitely be him. Although Jiang Tianyi did not understand why he was so determined and where his confidence came from. But he still firmly believed in it. Moreover, he believed that day would not be too far away. He would definitely see it. South of God's Guide Grotto Heaven. About 1,000,000 miles away, the sword of burial of heaven was flying through the vast sea of clouds. The world and the sword had already expanded 100 times compared to before, becoming a vast and boundless world. The Earth Spirit clan had multiplied to its peak, with a population of more than 300,000, temporarily dominating this world. In the endless mountains and rivers, there were also hundreds of millions of birds and beasts living. Ji Tianqing stood in the clouds, overlooking the mountains and rivers for thousands of miles, his expression neither sad nor happy. Burial of heaven, keep going south. We have to leave the boundless heaven continent as soon as possible. He did not speak, but used his soul to send a voice transmission to Burial of Heaven. Burial of Heaven immediately responded, his deep voice ringing in his mind. Actually, you don't have to expose your identity so early. We can continue to lie low, and there's no need to leave the boundless heaven continent in such a hurry. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, the decisive battle with the Azura God Emperor and revenge against the 5 emperors is something that I have to do sooner or later. Although my strength is not there yet, and the time is not ripe, I have to prepare beforehand. At least before the decisive battle, I have to build momentum in advance. Burial of Heaven pondered for a moment, then asked, you know, with our meager strength, it's impossible for us to take revenge. So, you want to use external forces to build your own force. You don't care about ordinary forces, so your target is, the various ancient clans? Ji Tianqing nodded and explained, how would ordinary people dare to resist the rule of the 5 emperors? Only 108. No, that's not right. There aren't that many anymore. Only the great ancient clans have the courage and qualifications to resist the 5 emperors. Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment before saying, back then, you went to all the grotto heavens and almost crushed all the ancient clans. Now that even the Jiang clan is unwilling to help you, how can those ancient clans who have a grudge against you help you fight against the 5 emperors? Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a meaningful smile as he said, Burial of Heaven, you don't understand the human heart. If the 5 emperors did not rule over the god realm, the various ancient clans would not have been able to unite. Because they were all very proud. They would be like before, each doing their own thing, like a plate of loose sand, fighting for power and profit. However, when the era of the 5 emperors arrived, they could only abandon their former enmity and form an alliance. Even though there were a few factions among them that had completely sided with the 5 monarchs. However, most of the ancient clans still stood against the 5 emperors. They didn't agree with or accept the rule of the 5 emperors. Burial of Heaven continued the conversation and said, I roughly understand what you mean. The conflict between the ancient clans and the 5 emperors was only temporarily suppressed and did not really disappear. At present, the various ancient clans pretended to obey the 5 emperors in order to preserve their strength and did not join forces to resist. However, when their conflict intensifies to a certain extent, or when someone takes the lead to rebel against the 5 emperors and gives them hope, they will also rebel against the 5 emperors without hesitation. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a smile, that's right. Before the appearance of the 5 emperors, the ancient clans stood at the peak of the god realm for tens of thousands of years. Nobility and arrogance flowed in their bones and blood. They would never agree with or allow anyone to be above them. However, the current situation was complicated. The 5 emperors had reached the peak of the divine Tao and firmly controlled the god realm. The ancient clans did not have the ability to resist, so they could only bide their time and keep a low profile. No one was willing to be the first to be eliminated by the 5 emperors. Most of them were trying their best to develop and increase their strength. Once the time was ripe, or if there was a true powerhouse leading them, they would no longer hold back. They would definitely join forces to overthrow the 5 emperors' rule. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Burial of Heaven roughly understood the current situation. It was still his plan. Therefore, you're that powerhouse who can lead the ancient clans to resist the 5 emperors' rule. Although your current strength is still insufficient and can't meet the 5 emperors face to face yet. But you exposing your identity this time is to let the ancient clans of the boundless heaven continent know that you're back. Even if your strength is still not powerful enough, those ancient clans will endure and wait when they see hope. There will come a day when your strength is strong enough, they will follow you and rise in revolt. Ji Tianqing nodded with a faint smile and said, that's right. I want to convey a signal to the ancient clans. That Kenshin who once suppressed the 5 emperors and stood at the peak of the god realm has returned. As long as they don't admit defeat and don't resign themselves to fate and wait patiently, light will eventually come. Many ancient clans had been oppressed for 1,000 years and couldn't see hope. Many people's wills were wavering. Some people were wavering, not knowing whether to resist the Azura God Emperor's rule. Because they felt that the Azura God Emperor didn't attack the ancient clans, they were safe. There were also people who went with the flow and felt that they were powerless to reverse the situation, so they accepted the Azura God Emperor's rule and willingly became his lackeys. For example, Bai Feng. So, I can't drag it on any longer. If I drag it on for a few decades or a few centuries, who knows if more ancient clans will completely submit to the 5 emperors and swear loyalty to them. Burial of Heaven was silent. It understood Ji Tianqing's worries and concerns, and also felt that Ji Tianqing's actions were understandable. However, it still gave Ji Tianqing a reminder. But you exposed your identity in advance and will definitely be hunted down by the entire boundless heaven continent. Forget about those patrol envoys, they weren't worth mentioning. If a peak divine king makes a move, or the Azura god emperor appears, how will you deal with it? Ji Tianqing revealed a confident smile and said, after staying in the boundless heaven continent for a few years, I've long investigated clearly. Ever since the Azura god emperor ascended the throne and controlled the entire continent, he never appeared again. What does this mean? It means that the 5 of them relied on half of the heaven-punishing array to break through the divine king realm and reach the god emperor realm. But they just reached the god emperor realm and urgently need to consolidate their strength realm. In this 1,000 years, the Azura god emperor must have been cultivating in seclusion. Even if I blew the matter up this time, only an inspector deputy commander came forward and there was no news about the Azura god emperor. This proves that my guess is right. Therefore, the Azura god emperor might not know that I'm back. As long as we leave the boundless heaven continent as soon as possible, there won't be any danger. Chapter 3506. After communicating with Ji Tianqing, Burial of Heaven realized that its worries were unnecessary. Ji Tianqing's exposure of his identity was not accidental, but intentional. His revenge plan had already begun in advance. Blowing the matter up and letting the ancient clans know about it was only an important step in his plan. Burial of Heaven wanted to know what his next plan was. After leaving the boundless heaven continent, where do you plan to go? Back to the primal chaos continent? After all, your old subordinates were all on that continent. If they were not purged, they should still follow you. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and replied, after leaving the boundless heaven continent, I will continue south and will first pass by the reincarnation island. If I can open the passage between the 2 worlds, I want to go to the dragon realm to find Wuhan. If I can't open it, I will go to the primal chaos continent to find my old subordinates. Burial of Heaven agreed. That's good too. You have already ascended to the god realm for almost 10 years. You should go to the dragon realm to find your son. Ji Tianqing was silent for a moment and reminded it, Burial of Heaven, just keep flying south. I have to enter the god pagoda, so I will be delayed for a while. Shadow Executioner's flying divine artifact has been following behind us. Looking at his posture, he should only be following us and doesn't dare to intercept us. I reckon that he should have informed the patrol commander. The patrol commander will definitely order the various regions to gather countless god kings to intercept and kill us. So, just act according to the circumstances. Burial of Heaven responded, indicating that there was no problem. Ji Tianqing did not say anything else and disappeared into the sky in a flash. He hid in a desolate mountain range, took out the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda, and entered the distorted space. The blood flame sacred tree had been growing, reaching a height of about 18,000 feet and covering a radius of 20,000 miles. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were diligently cultivating under the sacred tree, desperately improving their strength. What made Ji Tianqing rejoice was that Ji Ku had reached the peak of the god monarch realm and was in the process of breaking through to the god king realm. Even though this process was very long and difficult. In fact, Ji Ku would fail many times. However, Ji Tianqing believed that she would be able to smoothly break through to the divine king realm after obtaining the inheritance of the divine phoenix. As for Yun Yao's situation, it was still not optimistic. Before finding the 7th divine bead, she would never be able to break through to the god king realm. However, she was not discouraged. She continued to strengthen her foundation and improve her strength. Ji Tianqing discovered that she was currently exploring the limits of the Divine Lord realm. Her current strength was equivalent to 10 times of a peak divine lord. Moreover, she was still slowly improving and strengthening. Ji Tianqing understood that the deeper her foundation was, the stronger she would be when she broke through to the God-King realm in the future. Just like him, most of the time, he would be strengthened to 99 times. Once he broke through to a higher realm, he would be able to sweep through everyone in the same realm as him, and even defeat those who were stronger than him. In addition, there was another piece of news that comforted him. Yang had been cultivating in seclusion for so long. Not only had his injuries healed, his strength had also broken through to the 5th level of the Divine King realm. White Dragon, Black Dragon, and Qian Yu had also reached the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm. Only his daughter, Wu Shuang, was weaker. She had just reached the 8th level of the Divine Lord realm not long ago. Even so, Ji Tianqing was still rather pleased. He flew around the Blood Flame sacred tree. After checking on everyone's situation, he sat down cross-legged. Then, he closed his eyes and began to do something very important. Swoosh! His god had left his mind and flew into Kenshin's tomb in his body. Ever since he ascended to the divine world, he had not entered Kenshin's tomb once in the past 10 years. Because he knew very well what was inside Kenshin's tomb and what could be used. Now, he felt that the time was right. There was something that he had to find the answer to. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing's godhead became his avatar and flew across the dark and cold wasteland. A moment later, he arrived at a corner of the wasteland. The wasteland in front of him was shrouded in a boundless chaotic fog. There was a small empty area. The ground was covered with mysterious and profound formation patterns. Without a doubt. That was the Heaven Punishing Formation. A long time ago, Ji Tianqing uncovered a small part of the fog and comprehended the great Tao from the Heaven Punishing Formation. Therefore, he created the Heaven Punishing Sword Formation and the Heaven Punishing Divine Art. But now, he had encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation. Whether it was the Heaven Punishing Sword Formation or the Heaven Punishing Divine Art, it was very difficult to improve. Therefore, he could only remove the fog and observe more of the Heaven Punishing Formation. Gazing at the fog within a radius of 100,000 miles, Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a smile. He murmured, "In the past, I was weak and could not see the edge of the chaotic fog. Even if I used all my strength and used the 9 moves of burial of heaven, I could only break a corner of the fog. Now, it seems that the Heaven Punishing Formation I see is only 1% of the entire formation." Finished talking, he formed sword seals with both hands and released resplendent sword lights that filled the sky with all his strength, slashing towards the chaotic fog in front of him. Swoosh! Swoosh, swoosh! 99 streaks of resplendent sword lights erupted with the most powerful power. They slashed down on the fog one after another, wreaking havoc everywhere. Very soon, the chaotic fog in front of him was dispelled in large amounts. Originally, the fog area that he broke open in the past was only a radius of 1,000 miles. But after 100 breaths of time, the empty area that was removed expanded to a radius of 20,000 miles. It expanded a full 20 times. Compared to the entire Heaven Punishing Formation, there was already 20% of the area that was clearly presented before Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked at the newly opened empty area. His eyes stared at the billions of formation patterns on the ground and revealed a gratified smile. After I comprehend this 20% of the formation, the Heaven Punishing Divine Art will be able to deduce another 2 levels. The Heaven Punishing Sword Formation's power will also increase explosively several times. 4th level Divine King Realm, middle level Divine King. I'll be able to reach it very soon. After muttering to himself, he abandoned all distracting thoughts and started to observe the formation patterns on the ground, memorizing it in his heart. Time flew by quickly. The dark and cold wasteland was eerily silent. Ji Tianqing was like a stone statue. He stood in the sky and looked down at the formation pattern that was 20,000 miles in radius. He focused on observing and studying it. After 3 months, he finally memorized the formation pattern that was 20,000 miles in radius. After all, there were more than 300 million formation patterns in this area and they contained hundreds of millions of variations. If an ordinary lower divine king were to observe for 2 to 3 years, he might not be able to remember all of it. Swoosh! After Ji Tianqing memorized the formation pattern, he left Kenshin's tomb and the godhead returned to his body. He sat under the sacred tree and started to study and comprehend the heaven-punishing formation. He improved the heaven-punishing sword formation and deduced the 4th level of the heaven-punishing divine art. He was now in the advanced 3rd level divine king realm. The cultivation technique that he was cultivating was the 3rd level of the heaven-punishing divine art. In the past, he could not deduce the 4th level of the cultivation technique and his strength improved very slowly. But it was different now. He already had the outline of the 4th level of the cultivation technique in his mind. The 3rd level of the heaven-punishing divine art was finally completed and close to perfection. In the process of his seclusion, his strength had unknowingly increased. Chapter 3507. Ji Tianqing's guess was not wrong. For an entire month, Shadow Executioner Divine Envoy's void-piercing hairpin had been following behind the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Both sides always maintained a distance of 10,000 miles. The void-piercing hairpin would not follow too closely, nor did it have the intention of intercepting the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The situation was just as Ji Tianqing expected. Shadow Executioner Divine Envoy and the rest were just following him, as long as they were not shaken off. The other 21 Divine King powerhouses were riding on the Azure Domain Lord's divine warship, chasing all the way. At the same time, the inspector's deputy commander, Jin Shuang, also brought 7 inspectors and was rushing over at the fastest speed. Moreover, Jin Shuang also sent orders to the various southern domains, ordering many domain lords and divine kings to head to the Tiannan region to intercept Ji Tianqing. Because everyone expected it. The Sword of Burial of Heaven flew all the way south. It was bound to pass through the Tiannan region at the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent, and then escape into the endless sky sea. Once Ji Tianqing escaped from the boundless heaven continent, it would be too difficult to catch him again. In short, after Jin Shuang learned of Ji Tianqing's true identity, she used all her strength to weave an inescapable net, vowing to capture Ji Tianqing. Once Ji Tianqing was caught and handed over to the Azura God Emperor, it would definitely be a great contribution. Therefore, Jin Shuang was determined to win. And the location of the net was also temporarily set to be within the Tiannan region. That evening, the sun set in the west. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was flying in the middle of the Tiannan region, crossing the vast white sea of clouds. The Tiannan region was located at the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent. If they continued to fly south for 5 days, they would be able to leave the boundless heaven continent and enter the Xiaolong Sea area. Although the void-piercing hairpin was still following behind the Sword of Burial of Heaven, it had no intention of intercepting. But the Burial of Heaven had a rough idea and guessed that the other party might make a move. After all, it would soon leave the boundless heaven continent. If the other party did not make a move, there would be no chance. As expected. Inside the void-piercing hairpin, in the dimly lit hall. The atmosphere was somewhat dull. Region Master Mingluan was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall. He was fully focused on casting spells and controlling the sky-piercing hairpin. Qin Kong and the Tri-River Zone Lord looked at the Shadow Executioner with solemn expressions. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner was holding a communication jade slip in his hand. This jade slip was sent by Vice Commander Jin Shuang. He had just received it. When he finished reading the information in the jade slip, he frowned with a solemn expression. Sigh. What should come will come in the end. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner put away the communication jade slip and sighed helplessly. Qing Kong and the Three River Region Lords' hearts tightened, and they hurriedly asked, Sir Divine Envoy, was it an order from Sir Jin Shuang? What's the situation? What did Sir Jin Shuang say? Upon hearing these two sentences, even Mingluan Region Master, who was controlling the space-piercing hairpin, pricked up his ears to listen. The Shadow Executioner glanced at the two domain lords and said in a low voice, It is indeed Lord Jin Shuang's order. The content is very simple. I believe you have already guessed it. Lord Jin Shuang brought a group of divine envoys and entered the South Heaven region yesterday. In addition, Lord Jin Shuang sent orders to the surrounding regions as early as a month ago. 10 domain lords and more than 10 divine king powerhouses have rushed to the South Heaven region to help and surround and kill Kenshin. Lord Jin Shuang said that the encirclement has already closed, and all the divine kings are in place. It will soon be completed. And our mission is, to immediately intercept Kenshin and stall for time. When the reinforcements arrive, our mission will be completed. At that time, Lord Jin Shuang will reward us according to our merits and report it to the Imperial Tutor, Meng Shuai, and God Emperor. After hearing this, the faces of the two territorial lords changed, revealing a look of deep worry. This, as expected. Although they had already guessed Jin Shuang's plan, and knew that this day would come sooner or later. But now that they received Jin Shuang's order, they were still full of hesitation and fear. The Three River Region Lord frowned and smiled bitterly, Sir Divine Envoy, can we disobey? With just the few of us, intercepting Kenshin is simply courting death. The Clear Sky Region Lord also nodded and persuaded, we don't need to intercept at all. In any case, Kenshin hasn't left the South Heaven region, we can continue to follow. When the encirclement closes, the other divine kings will arrive, and everyone will attack together. Even the Mingluan Region Lord, who was controlling the sky-piercing hairpin, nodded in agreement. Sir Divine Envoy, why don't you send a message to Lord Jin Shuang and ask him to consider our suggestion? The Shadow Executioner emissary also smiled bitterly and shook his head, you think too simply. If we can disobey, this emissary is also unwilling to intercept. But in fact, if we intercept Kenshin, we may have a chance of survival. But disobeying Lord Jin Shuang's order is a road to death. Moreover, Lord Jin Shuang's meaning is for us to stall for time. Only in this way can the encirclement be completed in the south of the South Heaven region. If we don't stall for time, the encirclement will be at the southernmost seaside. That's too risky. If Kenshin escapes into the Sky Sea, no one can bear this responsibility. Hearing this, the three region lords were silent. A moment later, the Clear Sky Region Lord's eyes dimmed and her tone was bitter, that is to say, we can only follow orders and there is no room for redemption. Of course. The Shadow Executioner emissary nodded, took a deep breath, and said in a solemn tone, well, everyone get ready, we should attack. As his voice fell, the Shadow Executioner emissary personally controlled the sky-piercing hairpin's divine array and accelerated forward. Whoosh! A white light flashed. The sky-piercing hairpin's speed suddenly doubled, crossing 50,000 miles in the blink of an eye, and appeared directly in front of the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Immediately after, the sky-piercing hairpin lit up with resplendent five-colored divine light, releasing dozens of light pillars that blasted toward the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! A total of more than 30 light pillars, like thunder tearing through the sky, covered the brilliance of the setting sun, and illuminated a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Between heaven and earth, a violent aura that could destroy heaven and earth erupted, and the divine power instantly became chaotic. Many light pillars crisscrossed like a large net, and were about to cover the Sword of Burial of Heaven. At this critical moment, the Sword of Burial of Heaven suddenly adjusted its direction and teleported out horizontally. Whoosh! Sword light flashed, and the Sword of Burial of Heaven moved 20,000 miles horizontally, avoiding the bombardment of dozens of light pillars. It adjusted its direction again and accelerated toward the south. Obviously, the Sword of Burial of Heaven didn't want to be entangled with the sky-piercing hairpin, and just wanted to escape as soon as possible. However, the Shadow Executioner Emissary and the other three jointly controlled the sky-piercing hairpin, and once again released 9 light blades that could split heaven and earth, slashing toward the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The 9 sacred light blades locked onto the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and no matter where it fled, they would catch up. The Sword of Burial of Heaven flashed in the sky, teleported, and constantly adjusted its direction, trying to escape the pursuit of the light blades. Unfortunately, it couldn't escape in the end, and was quickly hit by several light blades. Bang! Bang bang! Muffled sounds burst out one after another, and the Sword of Burial of Heaven was hit until light splashed everywhere. It trembled violently, and swayed as it smashed into the ground. After all, it was only a mid-grade king-level divine sword. How could it resist the pursuit of a high-grade king-level divine artifact? Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3508. Swoosh! 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 Amidst the divine light, Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner brought along 3 domain lords and appeared in the sky. The Sword of Burial of Heaven had just resolved the tremendous impact when it was surrounded by Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner and the rest. The 3 domain lords were all wielding divine weapons. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner's hands were empty, but the space-piercing hairpin floated above his head. Sword God, it's time for you to die. Stop hiding and come out. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner glared at the Sword of Burial of Heaven and shouted coldly. The 3 domain lords were also accumulating power and waiting to take action, their bodies suffused with cold killing intent. The Sword of Burial of Heaven did not act rashly and just guarded against the 4 powerhouses. The scene fell into silence. Both sides were silent. The Sword of Burial of Heaven did not counterattack violently. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner and the rest were not in a hurry either, happy to stall for time. But no one knew that the Sword of Burial of Heaven was currently contacting Ji Tianqing in the distorted spacetime. And Ji Tianqing was still cultivating enclosed seclusion, working hard to consolidate his divine Tao foundation. A month passed in the divine world. And he had already cultivated for 50 months in the distorted spacetime. During this period, the heaven-punishing divine art's 3rd-level cultivation method was restored to a perfect state by him. Furthermore, he even deduced the heaven-punishing divine art's 4th-level cultivation method. His strength also rose with the tide, successfully breaking through the limit of the 3rd-level realm, reaching the 4th-level divine king realm. The current him was already a middle-level divine king long ago. Of course, after becoming a middle-level divine king, he was not in a hurry to exit seclusion and was still accumulating strength foundation. But the Sword of Burial of Heaven awakened him. Tianqing, you guessed right. They indeed could not resist taking action to intercept. Looks like their encirclement has already formed. Many divine king powerhouses are currently rushing over. Ji Tianqing hurriedly ended cultivation and left the distorted spacetime, and asked the Sword of Burial of Heaven, we've already reached the Sky South region. The Sword of Burial of Heaven answered, yes. We're currently in the central region of the Sky South region. In another few days, we'll be able to leave the vast heaven continent and enter the endless sky sea. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly, the corners of his mouth hooked into a sneer, and said, looks like the encirclement set up by Jin Shuang is going to close the Sky South region. He will definitely not let us enter the sea, and he will not let me go. As soon as he finished speaking, he put away the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda and left the sword world. Shwa! In the next moment, a white light flashed in the sky, and Ji Tianqing appeared. With Shadow of Heaven Sky Sword, Divine Envoy Executioner and the others with a cold Divine and the others and the others. Of Executors. Sky. Shadow. 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 For some reason, Ji Tianqing hadn't even attacked yet. His cold eyes swept across God Envoy Zhan Ying and the 3 region lords, and they were all frightened and trembling. Lord 2, the 2 domain, 2 domain of domain, Lord. There was no other way. As the old saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow. The 2 words Kenshin resounded like thunder, leaving a deep impression on everyone. If the crowd did not know Ji Tianqing's true identity, they would be full of contempt and ridicule, and then rush forward. But they knew that Ji Tianqing was Kenshin, and their hearts were filled with fear. How could they have the slightest bit of ambition and self-confidence? Shadow of Executioner saw that the aura of the 4 of them had been completely suppressed by Ji Tianqing. If this continued, the 3 domain lords would have to retreat, and they would have to escape before the battle. Thus, Shadow of Executioner could only brace himself and shout in a low voice, Kenshin, Lord Jin Shuang is on his way, and there are more than 30 divine kings gathered in the Sky South region. This time, you can't escape even if you have wings. Even if you have great ability, you will be buried here. At this point, it's useless for you to say anything. I advise you to surrender obediently, and you might be able to save your little life. Without waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianqing raised his head and laughed, ha ha ha, such ridiculous words, do you believe them yourself? Shadow of Executioner's face turned red, and he was speechless. Nonsense, even an idiot knew what would happen to Kenshin if he fell into the hands of the Azura God Emperor. Ji Tianqing said in a mocking tone, you think I don't know what the 4 of you are trying to do? You want to stall for time and wait for reinforcements? Stop dreaming. Since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish. As his voice fell, Ji Tianqing waved the burial of heaven with all his strength, and brazenly attacked. Sword, come. He pointed the sword in his right hand to the sky, and released a vast amount of divine power, using his ultimate sword technique. In an instant, 30,000 bright stars lit up in the sky, and fell like meteors. Whoosh 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 whoosh. There were 30,000 starry swords. Each of the swords was 30,000 feet long, brighter than the stars, and extremely powerful. In the blink of an eye, the 30,000 swords carried a divine power that could suppress everything, and descended above everyone's heads. At this time, the area within 30,000 miles was enveloped by the sword light, and the space was also sealed. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords' faces changed, and their eyes were filled with fear and despair. Boom! Boom boom boom! In the next moment, the 30,000 starry swords crashed down, and an earth-shattering explosion erupted. The mountains and rivers within 30,000 miles were instantly blasted into ruins, and smoke and dust filled the sky. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords were also hit by the starry swords, and their bodies were covered in blood, and they were thrown out in a terrible state. Shadow of Executioner, who was stronger, dodged most of the attacks, and only took 2 hits. His left leg and back each took a hit, leaving behind deep wounds that exposed bone, and divine blood kept flowing out. The mid-king level divine armor he wore also had 2 holes in it. Compared to Shadow of Executioner, the injuries of the other 3 territorial lords were much more severe. Clearsky territorial lord's left arm had been shattered by the giant swords, and she was covered in blood and mud, lying in the ruins, wailing. Mingluan and Tri-River territorial lord had also had their armors destroyed, and their limbs cut off by the giant swords, and they were screaming in pain. But this was only the beginning of a nightmare. The 30,000 starry swords did not immediately disappear after landing on the ground. Among them, 20,000 starry swords sealed the area and formed the heaven-destroying sword formation. The other 10,000 giant swords turned into a rain of swords, hurricanes, and whirlpools, and attacked Shadow of Executioner and the others. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords were caught in the attack of the giant swords before they had time to heal their injuries. The 4 of them panicked, and hurriedly used all kinds of divine powers and supreme skills to block the attack of the giant swords. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing smiled with relief. Because he had comprehended 20% of the heaven-destroying sword formation, and not only had he deduced the more advanced heaven-destroying divine skill, but he had also improved the heaven-destroying sword formation. Now that he had used the heaven-destroying sword formation, he could summon 30,000 starry swords from outer space. Moreover, the sword formation was of a higher level than before, and its power had increased by several times. Even if he did not attack personally, he could still kill Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords by controlling the heaven-destroying sword formation. But this would take up too much time, and it would waste at least half a day. Therefore, in order to end the battle quickly, he waved the Sword of Burial of Heaven and attacked with all his might. Blade of Spacetime. Ji Tianqing shouted coldly, and he and his sword disappeared at the same time. The next moment, he held the Sword of Burial of Heaven and appeared 10,000 miles away, behind Minluan Territorial Lord. Chapter 3509. Among the 4 God Kings, Minluan Region Master was the weakest. The other 2 Region Masters and God Executioner Shadow were all 7th stage Realm God Kings. Only he was an intermediate God King. Even so, he had reached the peak of the 6th stage of the God King realm. At this moment, he was being attacked by a hurricane with a radius of 1,000 miles. This hurricane was formed by more than 2,000 star swords. Cold light flashed and the sword energy was threatening, tearing the surrounding space apart. Minluan Region Master tried his best to resist and had no time to care about anything else. When he realized that something was wrong, his divine senses detected that Ji Tianqing had appeared behind him and he was instantly terrified. Without any hesitation, he risked being shredded into pieces by the hurricane and flew forward through the sword-light hurricane, just to get away from Ji Tianqing. In his opinion, Ji Tianqing was more dangerous and terrifying than the sword-light hurricane. But even so, he was still one step too late. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing held the Burial of Heaven sword and stabbed out a dazzling white sword light that was thousands of feet long. The sword light was condensed to the extreme, like a real divine sword. It contained 150 types of laws and the spacetime divine power was condensed to the extreme. In a quarter of an instant, the dazzling white sword light pierced through the hurricane and stabbed Minluan Region Master's back. Pfft! Minluan's armor and divine power shield were easily pierced through as if they were made of paper. The dazzling white sword light broke through Minluan Region Master's body and directly tore him into 2. Crack! Following the crisp sound of bones breaking, the 2 halves of the body flew to both sides, splattering divine blood all over the sky. Minluan Region Master didn't even have time to scream and his divine body was destroyed by Ji Tianqing's sword. Swoosh! The 2 halves of the body were still floating in the air. Minluan Region Master's divinity had already left the body and fled to the edge of the sword array in a panic. Although he knew that Kenshin was very powerful, so powerful that he could only look up to him. But he totally didn't expect Kenshin's methods to be so ruthless and decisive. It had only been a few breaths of time since the battle started and Kenshin destroyed his divine body in one move. At the same time, his battle intent disappeared and there was only one thought left in his mind. Run! Run as far as you can, the further the better. At this moment, he did not care about the life or death of the other 3, and even threw Jin Shuang's orders to the back of his mind. Even if he ran away at the last moment and was severely punished by Jin Shuang, he did not care. He only wanted to escape from the heaven-destroying sword formation and get away from Kenshin. It was a pity. His godhead had only managed to flee 1,000 miles away when it was blocked by a vortex formed by a star sword. That whirlpool was like a bottomless abyss that ruthlessly devoured his godhead. The flying speed of the godhead instantly decreased by more than half. If he was in a deadlock with the sword-light vortex for a moment, he might still have a chance to escape and not be swallowed by the vortex. But Ji Tianqing had his eyes fixed on him. Seizing the opportunity, he chased after him and brandished his sword again. Rising Dragon Slash. A golden sword ray that was 100 miles long tore through the sky like a divine dragon and slashed at Mingluan's godhead. He could only watch helplessly as the giant sword came at him, but he was unable to dodge it. Boom! Amidst the deafening sound, Mingluan's godhead was slashed open on the spot, and more than 20 fragments burst out. Each fragment shone with 5 colors and was engraved with many laws and divine patterns. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. More than 20 fragments of the godhead fell from the sky, shining with a final dazzling light. Even though Mingluan was a powerful overlord in his territory, he was still a level 6 god. After all, he was a 6th stage realm middle-level god king. He also possessed all sorts of remarkable abilities and ultimate skills. He also had the means to destroy the heavens and earth. But all of this was not important anymore. Under Ji Tianqing's sword, he did not even last 2 moves before he was killed. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing waved his left hand and shot out a golden light that filled the sky, collecting all the fragments of the godhead into his bag. At the same time, thousands of miles away, the shadow executioner, Qin Kong, and Sanhe witnessed Mingluan's death with their own eyes. The 3 of them also widened their eyes in shock, revealing an expression of disbelief and fear. The 2 domain lords felt their minds go blank, and their will to fight disappeared. They trembled in fear and only wanted to escape. It's too terrifying. As expected of Kenshin, Mingluan was killed by him in 2 moves. How many moves can we take? The shadow executioner was also stunned, and the fear in his heart washed over his body, causing him to tremble all over. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. He was in a state of madness, screaming in disbelief. The last time I fought with him, although he killed Ku Yun and Xing Xiang, but his power was definitely not this terrifying. In just a few short months, his power actually increased by several times. What kind of monster is he? The shadow executioner's knowledge was overturned. The last time they fought, Ku Yun and Xing Xiang were entangled with Ji Tianqing for a long time before they were killed by Ji Tianqing. Moreover, the shadow executioner used the sky-piercing hairpin to successfully escape the seal of the heaven punishment sword array. But this time, Ji Tianqing only used 2 moves to kill Mingluan. His power had obviously increased. The shadow executioner could not help but think, this time, can my sky-piercing hairpin escape this sword array? Just as the 3 of them were in a daze, Ji Tianqing disappeared again. He teleported thousands of miles and rushed to the Tri-River Zone Lord's side, waving his sword rapidly. Hundreds of divine Tao precepts gathered in the sword radiance, and an incomparably violent divine power erupted like a flood, drowning the Tri-River Zone Lord. The Tri-River Zone Lord instantly came to his senses and desperately resisted, trying to avoid the sword radiance. As he dodged and ran, he even cried and begged Ji Tianqing for mercy. Lord Kenshin, please spare my life. However, it was all in vain. Kaboom! After an earth-shattering explosion, the Tri-River Zone Lord was also hit by the shocking sword radiance. Not only did his divine power shield collapse, but his protective armor was also shattered, and his divine body was also cut in half. There was no doubt that the Tri-River Zone Lord would follow in the footsteps of Mingluan Zone Lord. Even though he was a 7th Heaven Realm high-level divine king, his power was stronger than Mingluan Zone Lord. To Ji Tianqing, it did not make much of a difference. It was just the difference between 2 strikes and 3 strikes. Swoosh! The Tri-River Zone Lord burst out in despair and used a forbidden technique to forcibly merge the 2 halves of his divine body and desperately fled to the edge of the sword array. Ji Tianqing chased after him again, waving the burial of heaven's sword viciously. Crack! Another earth-shattering explosion. The Tri-River Zone Lord's incomplete divine body was cut into pieces on the spot, and blood splattered all over the sky. His godhead also escaped from his body and flew into the distance in horror. However, Ji Tianqing chased after him again, waving his sword fiercely. Bam! With a muffled sound, the Tri-River Zone Lord's godhead was cut into pieces by the sword radiance, and more than 20 pieces flew out. At this point, the Tri-River Zone Lord, a 7th Heaven Realm Divine King, was also killed by Ji Tianqing. Not far away, the Fairski Zone Lord was so frightened that his face turned pale, and his limbs turned cold. When he came to his senses, he turned around and desperately ran to the edge of the sword array. It was only then that he realized that Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner had already rushed to the edge of the sword array. When Ji Tianqing chased after the Tri-River Zone Lord, he had already decided to escape. Chapter 35:10. Damn bastard! What kind of divine envoy is this? He tried to persuade us to come here to die, but he ran faster than anyone else. Fairski cursed in her heart as she ran to the edge of the sword array. Ji Tianqing easily passed through the sword lights without any hindrance and caught up with her in an instant. Fairski Domain Master was filled with despair. She gritted her teeth and made a decision. She ignited her divine blood, detonated the nomological patterns on her divine spark, and used a forbidden technique. Chaotic Universe. Suddenly, his whole body ignited with bloody flames, and he was surrounded by dense nomological patterns. He was like a flaming sword, and his speed increased by more than 3 times as he rushed to the edge of the sword array. Wherever he passed, the huge starry swords that filled the sky were all knocked away by him. Although his body was covered with countless wounds and blood spurted out. He seemed to be unable to feel pain and had lost his mind. He rushed to the edge of the sword array recklessly. Once this forbidden technique was used, it could increase his strength by 3 times and make him invincible. However, the price was also extremely heavy. He sacrificed 2,000 years of cultivation and 18 nomological patterns. It would take at least 3,000 years of cultivation to make up for it. However, he was forced into a desperate situation and didn't care about that anymore. What was more important than staying alive? Ji Tianqing saw Fairski Domain Master use the forbidden technique and increase her speed by 3 times, so he gave up the chase. After all, Shadow Executioner had already escaped to the edge of the sword array. He had already entered the space-piercing hairpin and attacked the sword array's barrier with all his strength. Bam! He activated the space-piercing hairpin with all his strength, and a dazzling divine light burst out. He crashed into the sword array's barrier at a speed faster than the speed of light. Amidst the muffled loud noises, the light wall of the sword formation that covered the sky trembled violently, and cracks appeared on it. The space-piercing hairpin also shook violently, and divine light burst out. Shadow Executioner was also shaken to the point that his blood was surging and he saw stars. However, when he saw the cracks on the sword array's barrier, he was immediately energized and rushed over even more desperately. Ha ha ha. No matter how much his strength increases, this sword array can't become a high-grade king divine array. With my space-breaking hairpin, I can still break out of the sword formation. The Shadow Executioner emissary roared emotionally. He recklessly exploded with divine power, pushing the sky-piercing hairpin's power to the extreme. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing hurriedly teleported over to intercept God Emissary Zhaneying. Last time, I hadn't broken through yet, so you took the opportunity to escape. You want to escape this time? In your dreams. Ji Tianqing snorted coldly and waved his sword towards the sky-piercing hairpin. Sword of Destruction. He absorbed the power of the 5 elements world, gripped the sword with both hands, and fiercely slashed out a 1,000-mile-long golden sword. This sword strike had the power to split the heavens and earth, to sever space, and to destroy the world. The giant divine sword that was like a scorching sun slashed down with the power to destroy everything, causing the entire sword formation to shimmer with golden light. The Shadow Executioner forgot everything and used all his strength to activate the sky-piercing hairpin, slamming it into the light wall of the sword formation. The void-piercing hairpin was still tens of thousands of feet away from the light wall of the sword formation and was about to crash into it. At this moment, the sword of Armageddon descended from the sky and struck the sky-piercing hairpin. Kaboom! A thunderous sound that was comparable to the thunder of the ninth heaven and shook the universe exploded within the sword formation. The sky-piercing hairpin, which was flying faster than the speed of light, was hit by the giant divine sword and flew out violently. Not only did it not hit the light wall of the sword formation, but it also rolled a few hundred times, smashing hundreds of giant starry swords along the way and finally falling 5,000 miles away. When it came to a stop, the resplendent divine light on its surface had already shattered. The middle of the hairpin was deeply dented and the two ends stuck up, almost being cut in half. Fortunately, it was a superior grade King Divine artifact, which was why it was able to survive. If it were a medial grade King Divine artifact, it would have been cut in half or even shattered into pieces. Seeing this scene, the Fairsky domain master was terrified and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Oh my god! That's a superior grade King Divine artifact. Kenshin's sword strike was so powerful. Didn't his cultivation level drop? Why is he still a high-level Divine King? Fairsky Territory Lord's first reaction was that Ji Tianqing was still a high-level Divine King, which was why he could severely injure the sky-piercing hairpin with one strike. If he wasn't a high-level Divine King, no one could do it. Inside the sky-piercing hairpin, Shadow Executioner suffered a backlash. He was already bleeding from his 7 orifices and was dizzy. He was also extremely terrified. He roared in despair, how could my space-piercing hairpin not be able to block it? The last time they fought, Ji Tianqing couldn't do anything to the sky-piercing hairpin. He couldn't even catch up, let alone severely injure the sky-piercing hairpin. This time, Ji Tianqing's sword hit the sky-piercing hairpin and almost cut it in half. How could Shadow Executioner not be horrified? The sky-piercing hairpin was his greatest trump card and life-saving trump card. Now, his life-saving trump card was no longer useful. He also saw what happened to him. Ji Tianqing flew toward the sky-piercing hairpin with the Burial of Heaven sword in hand. He also frowned, his face gloomy as he thought to himself, I've already broken through to a mid-level Divine King and used the Sword of World Destruction, but I still can't cut the sky-piercing hairpin. It seems that the sky-piercing hairpin is even tougher than an ordinary king-level high-level divine artifact. If one sword doesn't work, then two. This thought flashed through his mind. Ji Tianqing flew above the sky-piercing hairpin and slashed down with the sword again. Sword of World Destruction. He drew on the power of the world again and slashed out a 1,000-mile-long divine golden sword at the sky-piercing hairpin. Shadow Executioner was filled with fear and his soul almost left his body. He couldn't care less about his injuries and hurriedly controlled the divine array to escape on the sky-piercing hairpin. However, the distance between the two sides was too close. Before the sky-piercing hairpin could fly away, it was hit by the divine giant sword again. Crack! The divine giant sword still hit the middle of the sky-piercing hairpin, hitting the deep indentation with precision. This time, the sky-piercing hairpin couldn't take it anymore and was split into two on the spot. With a crisp cracking sound, the two broken parts of the sky-piercing hairpin were also thrown out in opposite directions. Mighty divine power continuously surged out of the neat cut, scattering divine stones and all kinds of debris in the sky. Even Shadow Executioner, who was hiding in the sky-piercing hairpin, was thrown out by the huge impact and tumbled across the sky. Before he could regain his balance, Ji Tianqing charged over with his sword again. Shadow Executioner, don't even think about escaping this time. Die! Ji Tianqing shouted coldly and swung his sword repeatedly, splashing out dazzling sword light that covered the sky. Shadow Executioner, who was already seriously injured, could only desperately wave his divine sword and barely block. Clang! 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 After a series of muffled sounds, Shadow Executioner was no match for Ji Tianqing and his divine sword was sent flying. Immediately after, he was hit more than 10 times and his body shattered into pieces on the spot, spraying blood all over the sky. After his divine body was destroyed, his divine spark fled in panic. However, the heaven-vanquishing sword array was intact, and even the sky-piercing hairpin couldn't break through it. How could his divine spark escape? After barely dodging Ji Tianqing's 2 sword strikes, his divine spark was in a desperate situation and had nowhere to run. Following Ji Tianqing's 3rd slash, his godhead finally crumbled, and was slashed into pieces that filled the sky. Chapter 35:11. The Shadow Executioner was also killed. Even though he had the sky-piercing hairpin, a superior king-grade divine artifact, he only lasted 2 more moves. Only Ji Tianqing and the Clear Sky Domain Ruler were left in the heaven-destroying sword formation. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing waved his hand and put away the divine spark fragment of the Shadow Executioner. Of course, there was also his spatial ring, king-grade divine sword, and the broken sky-piercing hairpin. To Ji Tianqing, any treasure on a divine king powerhouse's body was useful. For example, the broken sky-piercing hairpin was a superior king-grade divine artifact. He could give it to the heaven-mending pearl to devour and refine. Then, it could be converted into endless divine power to increase Ji Tianqing's strength or nourish the 5-element world. This was also a gain. Ji Tianqing put away the divine spark fragment of the Shadow Executioner and looked at the Clear Sky Domain Ruler. The Clear Sky Domain Ruler was still in a state of madness. Her entire body was burning with bloody flames and surrounded by nomological divine patterns. Her strength had increased by at least 3 times. However, when she slammed into the sword formation's light wall with all her might, she only managed to crack it a few times. She was unable to break through the sword formation. She bounced back violently, blood spurting from her mouth and nose. However, she did not seem to know pain. She unleashed her full strength again and slammed into the sword formation's light wall. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing shouted, "The Shadow Executioner is dead. No one will use orders to suppress you. If you are willing to surrender and pledge your allegiance to me, I can spare your life." Ji Tianqing did have the intention of subduing the Clear Sky Domain Ruler. He was a superior divine king after all. His combat strength was stronger than Yank and Chao Qinyu. Unfortunately, the Clear Sky Domain Ruler did not appreciate it. Ha ha ha. Even if I die here, I will never pledge my allegiance to you. You are Kenshin, the Azura God Emperor's mortal enemy. Soon, you will be surrounded by dozens of divine kings and die without a burial place. If I surrender now, not only will I be buried with you, but I will also be cursed forever. At that time, not only will this prince go down in infamy, but this prince's wife, children, family, and friends will also be implicated. Sword God, you can give up on that idea. The Clearsky Domain Master's face was covered in blood as she roared in a hoarse voice. Obviously, he was determined to die and would rather die than submit. Ji Tianqing was also very helpless. He shook his head and sighed, "You're a guy who can see things clearly and see the future. Since you insist on seeking death, don't blame me for not giving you a chance." Ji Tianqing had never been an irresolute and indecisive person. Even though he had given the Clearsky Domain Master a chance to subdue her, he had not been able to do so. However, Clearsky Domain Master refused. He didn't waste any more words and directly swung the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Heavenly Dragon World Slash. The first strike was like a divine golden dragon descending from the heavens, striking Fairsky Domain Lord with a loud bang. Bloody flames burst into the sky, and countless laws and divine runes collapsed. Fairsky Domain Master's body exploded into pieces. His weakened godhead was also flying around in the sky like a headless fly. Sword breaking 9 heavens. Ji Tianqing swung the second strike. The dazzling sword light was like the dawn that tore through the night, ruthlessly piercing Fairsky Domain Master's godhead. Crack. As a crisp cracking sound echoed out, more than 20 godhead fragments scattered in the air. Fairsky Domain Master had fallen. The battle was over. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and shot out a sky full of golden light, which wrapped around Fairsky Domain Master's godhead fragments, divine sword, and interspatial ring. The sky-vanquishing sword formation stopped operating, and everything quieted down. Ji Tianqing cleaned up the battlefield and picked up some broken king-grade divine artifacts and armor before the sky-vanquishing sword formation was complete. Swoosh! Then, he went back into the Sword of Burial of Heaven and let the Burial of Heaven continue flying south. Burial of Heaven was a little worried and asked, "Continue south?" Jin Shuang and dozens of God Kings are coming from all directions. Aren't we going to change direction? Ji Tianqing said indifferently, "You said it yourself. They are coming from all directions, and there are many of them. No matter how we change direction, we will always be in the heavenly south region. We can't escape the encirclement. Rather than that, we might as well speed up and try to break through the encirclement before they close in." Okay. Burial of Heaven was speechless and could only do as he was told. In the Sword World, Ji Tianqing took out the Jyotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and hurriedly entered the distorted spacetime. Time was of the essence, and he was not in the mood to check on everyone's cultivation. He hurriedly took out the spoils of the battle. For interspatial rings, for intact king-grade divine artifacts, 5 broken king-grade divine artifacts, and 1 broken king-grade high-grade divine artifact, sky-piercing hairpin. Of course, there were also hundreds of godhead fragments. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and used the power of the heaven-mending orb. A white light vortex appeared in his palm. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the 5 broken king-grade divine artifacts and the broken sky-piercing hairpin were all swallowed by the heaven-mending orb. Next, the heaven-mending orb would turn these king-grade divine artifacts into endless divine power. A part of it would be used to strengthen Ji Tianqing's strength, and the other part would be transferred to the 5 Elements world. Of course, after the 5 Elements world expanded and became stronger, Ji Tianqing's strength would also become stronger. It would be a pity for the 4 intact king-grade divine artifacts to be swallowed by the heaven-mending orb. Ji Tianqing decided to keep them and give them to Chao Qingyu, Yank, Lan, and Bai Long. At least, this could increase their combat strength to a certain extent. As for Yun Yao and Ji Ku's divine artifacts, Ji Tianqing would refine them himself. Next, Ji Tianqing checked the 4 interspatial rings and counted the cultivation resources inside. 4 hours later, he had roughly finished counting. The result was a little beyond his expectations. He originally thought that the Shadow Executioner Oracle and the 3 Territorial Lords did not have much wealth. He would be satisfied if each of them contributed hundreds of billions of divine stones at most. However, he did not expect that the 3 Territorial Lords' interspatial rings had accumulated more than 200 billion divine stones worth of resources. All kinds of divine stones, gems, divine gold, and materials were piled up into mountains. Countless divine pills, divine ability manuals, and talismans were also innumerable. There were even many king-grade low-grade divine artifacts and divine pills in the interspatial rings. Just the interspatial rings of the 3 Territorial Lords had contributed 700 billion divine stones worth of resources to Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing thought about it carefully and felt relieved. The territories of the 3 Territorial Lords were all prosperous places in the central part of the boundless heaven continent. There were all kinds of treasures and resources. Needless to say, the Shadow Executioner Oracle. This person had a high position and was good at forming cliques. His wealth far exceeded that of ordinary territorial lords. The cultivation resources piled up in his interspatial ring were worth more than 300 billion divine stones. This battle made Ji Tianqing rich overnight. He had gained trillions of divine stones worth of resources out of thin air. After he counted the 4 interspatial rings, he took out a portion of the king-grade divine pills, divine artifacts, divine ability manuals, and talismans. These treasures would be useful to him and everyone in the future. As for the other cultivation resources, he only kept about 300 billion divine stones and gave the rest to the heaven-mending orb to devour. Sword breaking the 9 heavens. Sword breaking the 9 heavens. Chapter 35:12. Ji Tianqing was very clear. Wanting to stabilize and increase his strength, not only did he have to raise his realm as soon as possible. He also had to nurture the 5 elements world and let the 5 elements world also grow rapidly. After all, he merged with the 5 elements world into one, sharing glory and loss. After dealing with the spoils of war, only then did Ji Tianqing pick up the 100 divine spark fragments and start closed seclusion to cultivate. He used the devour divine ability and quickly refined the divine spark fragments, selecting suitable divine Tao laws from among them, and carried out stripping and refining. Currently, he possessed 480 kinds of divine Tao laws, not far from the number of 500. Once the number of laws he grasped reached 500, there would be a qualitative leap, and his strength would definitely skyrocket. Ji Tianqing silently calculated in his heart as he refined the divine spark fragments, at most another 4 to 5 days, the burial of heaven will reach the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent and enter the Xiaolong Sea region. The encirclement of Jin Shuang and many divine kings should close in within 3 days and stop the burial of heaven. That is to say, I only have at most 5 months of cultivation time in the distorted spacetime. Within 5 months, refining the divine spark fragments of 4 divine king powerhouses. This was a very difficult task to complete in the past. But the situation developed to this point, no matter how difficult, Ji Tianqing had to complete it. He had to increase his strength as much as possible before the encirclement closed. Although he had a conjecture and judgment in his mind, he would not be too worried about the imminent danger. But that idea was just his conjecture, he could not guarantee it 100% either. Therefore, he still had to increase his strength as much as possible, and could not entrust his safety to that idea. In nearly half a year, the boundless heaven continent was no longer calm long ago, becoming turbulent. Ever since Ji Tianqing went south all the way, killing many divine kings, domain lords, and divine envoys, his name was destined to spread throughout boundless heaven. Especially when several divine envoys gathered manpower with great fanfare, dispatching many domain lords and divine kings to surround and capture Ji Tianqing, it had long alarmed dozens of regions. Countless powerhouses were discussing animatedly, waiting with bated breath, paying attention to the situation in the heavenly south region. Many experts knew that several god envoys and a large number of god king experts would complete the encirclement in the southern heaven region and carry out the final killing blow to Tianqing. And a month ago, another piece of news that blew everyone's eyeballs out spread in the boundless heaven continent. That arrogant, domineering, and lawless traitor Tian Xing was actually the sword god who had fallen 1,000 years ago. Who was Kenshin? 1,000 years ago, he was publicly acknowledged as the #1 expert, a terrifying existence who had intimidated countless god kings with a single sword strike. Even though he had fallen in outer space. However, he had only been dead for 1,000 years, and his reputation was still as powerful as ever. Everyone who had heard his name knew that Kenshin had returned. Furthermore, Kenshin causing such a huge commotion in the boundless heaven continent was provoking the Azura God Emperor. This was a declaration of war against the Azura God Emperor. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. A month ago, this shocking news had already spread wildly among countless divine king powerhouses. Especially the various major ancient clans, they were even completely stunned by this news, finding it hard to believe. However, after they came back to their senses, they all let out excited, pleasantly surprised, and agitated cheers. Many people inquired about the specific information from the Jiang clan, understanding the course of events. And even more ancient clans hurriedly held emergency meetings to discuss countermeasures. In the central region of the boundless heaven continent. Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, inside the resplendent assembly hall. More than a dozen middle stage and above God King experts gathered together to discuss important matters. Clan leader, the various major ancient clans have all taken action upon hearing the news. Should we take action? Bai Feng's whereabouts are unknown to this day. He's definitely in Kenshin's hands. Of course we have to go and rescue Bai Feng. Why did Kenshin not kill Bai Feng? Have you all thought about it? Even 1,000 years ago, Kenshin had a relationship with our Phoenix clan too. There wasn't any deep enmity. Since Kenshin didn't kill Bai Feng, then his life isn't in danger for the time being. Everyone doesn't need to worry. Of course we have to go to the Tiannan region. I agree with clan leader's decision. No matter what happens, we have to go and take a look. At the very least, we have to see with our own eyes whether Kenshin really came back to life or not. Northwest of the boundless heaven mainland. Similarly, in the assembly hall of the fighting grotto heaven. More than a dozen experts of the sixth heaven of the God King realm and above gathered in the hall to discuss countermeasures. All sorts of discussions filled the hall. My fellow comrades, do you still remember Kenshin who defeated our war god clan 1,000 years ago? Of course I remember. The disciples of the war god clan will never forget what happened a few months ago. Although we don't know how Kenshin, who died 1,000 years ago, came back to life, the Jiang clan's people can confirm this. However, since the Jiang clan's people can verify this information, we can't just sit and watch. Patrol Deputy Commander Jin Shuang has gathered more than a dozen God King experts and is trying their best to kill Kenshin. Kenshin is escaping towards the south. He will probably be stopped in the Tiannan region. Clan leader, everyone will follow your decision. Let's go to the Tiannan region together. No matter what, we have to see with our own eyes whether Kenshin has really come back to life or not. Southeast of the boundless heaven mainland. Azure Grotto Heaven, in the assembly hall of the Lan clan. The same scene appeared again. More than a dozen elders, protectors, and experts of the Lan clan were discussing Kenshin. After a round of discussion, they finally decided to send 5 God King experts to the Tiannan region to investigate the situation. Almost at the same time. The sect leader of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, Su Balian, who had not left the 100 Refinement Grotto Heaven for 1,000 years, also brought 6 God King experts and rushed towards the south. After all, the traitor Tianqing, who was also Kenshin, had the blueprint of the 100 Refinement Divine Hammer in his hands. Since it was related to the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect's divine treasure, Su Balian had to make a trip personally. Similar scenes played out in the other Grotto Heavens. More than half of the ancient clans had sent several God King experts to the south in a grandiose manner. Of course. All of this happened more than 20 days ago. Ever since Ji Tianqing killed the Shadow Executioner God Emissary, the Tiannan region set off a shocking storm. Jin Shuang and the other God Kings quickly found out where the Shadow Executioner God Emissary died. From this, the God Kings also deduced Ji Tianqing's approximate location. The encirclement formed by dozens of God Kings was closing in at a faster speed. Swoosh! The sun shone brightly, and the burial of heaven sword sped above the clouds. In the past 3 days, the burial of heaven sword traveled all the way south without being intercepted by anyone. It had already reached the southern end of the Tiannan region. After another day of flying, it would enter the Xiaolong region. The burial of heaven hoped that the next day would be as peaceful as before. But it understood that this was absolutely impossible. What should come would come in the end. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! Suddenly, the sky above the sea of clouds 10,000 miles to the south lit up with dazzling 5-colored divine light. At least 6 figures of God King experts appeared above the sea of clouds, forming a straight line. The burial of heaven immediately realized that the god kings had come to kill Kenshin. It hurriedly adjusted its direction and flew towards the southeast. However, several dazzling divine lights also lit up above the sea of clouds in the southeast. Seeing this scene, the burial of heaven could not help but sigh. In the end, we can't avoid a decisive battle. Chapter 35:13. Back then, Kenshin was unparalleled in the god realm. The sword of burial of heaven was so powerful that it didn't care about the godly kings at all. Especially those mid and high-level godly kings, they were all weak and dregs in its eyes. But that was then, and this was now. Now, Ji Tianqing was only a mid-level godly king, and it was only a mid-level king artifact. Seeing a large number of godly kings blocking its way in the skies to the south and southeast, it could only turn around and flee to the southwest. Temporarily avoiding the danger and waiting for an opportunity to break out was the wisest choice. It absolutely believed that as long as Ji Tianqing was given a few more decades, he would be able to return to his peak. At that time, other than the 5 emperors, Ji Tianqing would still be the number 1 godly king. However, in the southwest sky, a few dazzling divine lights also lit up and were rushing over like shooting stars. There were interceptions in all 3 directions. Burial of heaven didn't want to be entangled with them, so it could only flee to the east, west, or north. But if it did that, it would only get further and further away from the Xiaolong region. At the critical moment, burial of heaven woke up Ji Tianqing, who was in seclusion while thinking of countermeasures. There are 6 godly kings directly south, 8 in the southeast, and 7 in the southwest. From the number of people and divine power fluctuations, the godly kings directly south are weaker. Thinking of this, burial of heaven made a prompt decision and accelerated towards the south. It had already thought it through. Even if it was injured, as long as it could break through the 6 godly kings' blockade and successfully escape into the endless sky sea, it would be worth it. Whoosh! Burial of heaven pushed its power to the limit, and the blade also expanded to a length of 3,000 meters, shining with a dazzling light. The divine sword emitted an aura that could pierce through everything, and it was incomparably fierce. Like lightning, it streaked across the sky and charged towards the 6 godly kings in the south. Those 6 godly kings clearly didn't expect that the sword of burial of heaven would look hesitant. Not only did it not stop, but it also accelerated towards them. Damn it! It must think that we're easy to bully and wants to break through from here. Is that divine sword? Kenshin's sword, the sword of burial of heaven? Back then, I didn't participate in the War of the Gods, nor did I meet Kenshin. I only heard that the sword of the burial of heaven was unparalleled. Looking at it now, it's just so. Although we're about to meet up, we can't let our guard down. If the sword of burial of heaven escapes, we'll all commit suicide to atone for our sins. Don't worry. Even if we can't defeat the Kenshin, we should be able to stall the sword of burial of heaven. The 6 divine king experts in different attire discussed in whispers. They were all brimming with confidence. After all, they had the advantage in numbers and they were all above the 5th level of the divine king realm. In the blink of an eye, the sword of burial of heaven had arrived in front of him like a meteor, leaving a long trail of flames behind it. The 6 god kings no longer looked down on him as they unleashed their divine abilities with all their might to stop him. Sword cutting 100 rivers. Falling star spear. Myriad flower star rain. 8 extreme heaven sealing palm. Following a series of angry shouts, the 6 divine abilities and consummate divine abilities blasted toward the sword of burial of heaven at the same time. Perhaps a single god king wouldn't be able to stop the sword of burial of heaven. But with 6 god kings working together, the sword of burial of heaven instantly had a headache. Heaven Splitter Sword. It could only unleash its strongest power and use the Heaven Splitter Sword of burial of heaven's 9 moves to meet the divine light head-on. Boom! Crack! In the next instant, the sword of burial of heaven collided with the sword radiance, and palm shadows. A loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens erupted. The sword of burial of heaven instantly pierced through the divine technique shadows and giant palm shadows, shattering them into countless pieces. Incomparably violent shockwaves carried the divine light fragments and spread in all directions, creating a shocking storm. But it was a pity. The sword of burial of heaven only managed to break through 3 divine ability seals before its power was exhausted, and it flew back while tumbling. Among the 6 god kings, 3 of them were pale, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were filled with shock. As expected of the sword of burial of heaven. Its power is terrifying. Even if that divine sword has fallen to mid-king grade, it still has such terrifying power. One can only imagine that back then, fortunately, the 6 of us worked together and managed to stop it. Otherwise, it really would have broken out of the encirclement. The 3 injured god kings couldn't help but exclaim. The other 3 god kings didn't dare to be negligent. They hurriedly used their divine abilities and took the opportunity to attack the sword of burial of heaven. Swoosh! Swoosh! The sword of burial of heaven had just dissipated the huge impact when it was engulfed by the divine technique shadows again. Bam! 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 A series of muffled sounds erupted. The sword of burial of heaven was sent flying again, falling thousands of miles away. As a result, it was difficult for it to break out of the encirclement of the god kings, and it was even further away from the southern sea. The sword of burial of heaven managed to dissipate the impact with great difficulty and stabilized itself in the sky. At this moment, the 6 god kings from the south, 7 from the southwest, and 8 from the southeast all rushed forward. Swoosh! 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 21 god kings immediately formed an encirclement, sealing off an area of thousands of miles. The sword of burial of heaven fell into the encirclement and had no chance of breaking out. It could only hover in the sky. Fortunately, the 21 god kings were all armed with Kenshin soldiers. They stared at the sword of burial of heaven with murderous intent, but they didn't have any intention of attacking. They seemed to be waiting for something. The sword of burial of heaven's consciousness swept past the god kings, and it suddenly understood. They are waiting for the patrol deputy commander Jin Shuang. The sword of burial of heaven was naturally no stranger to Jin Shuang. During the battle in the Outer Realm, Jin Shuang was a capable general under the Azura God King. Many of Kenshin's followers and subordinates died tragically under Jin Shuang's cold frost divine blade. At this moment, in the northern sky, a resplendent divine light lit up, flying over as fast as a meteor. In that dazzling 5-colored divine light, there were at least 8 figures. They were all God King powerhouses. Before the 8 God Kings arrived, a dignified voice filled with vigor came first. Ha ha ha. Kenshin, we meet again. This middle-aged man's voice was filled with cruelty and resentment. The sword of burial of heaven wasn't unfamiliar. That was Jin Shuang's voice. As expected. After 2 breaths of time, the dazzling divine light arrived. 8 divine king powerhouses in different attire arrived at the scene. The one leading them was Jin Shuang. He was nearly 3 meters tall, wearing a dark silver divine armor, a scarlet cloak on his shoulders, and 6 blade-like colorful wings on his back. The 7 god kings behind him were all patrol overseers under the Azura God Emperor. Although they wore different kinds of armor and long robes, they all wore the patrol overseer's badge and token. Moreover, the strength of these 7 patrol overseers was stronger than many of the god kings present. Only 2 of them were 6th-degree realm god kings. The other 5 were all god kings. And the strongest was naturally the 8th-level god king Jin Shuang. Seeing Jin Shuang and the 7 patrol overseers arrive, the 21 god kings surrounding the sword of burial of heaven heaved a sigh of relief and bowed. Greetings, Deputy Commander, sir. Jin Shuang waved his hand to indicate that everyone was excused. His eyes were filled with resentment as he stared at the sword of burial of heaven. He laughed sinisterly, Kenshin, you can't escape even if you grow wings. Even if you hide in your shell, it's useless. Chapter 35:14. Although Jin Shuang learned from the shadow executioner that the traitor Tianqing was Kenshin, the Jiang clan's patriarch and elders could also confirm this point. But in fact, Jin Shuang still found it hard to believe this result. It was too strange. 1,000 years ago, he followed the Azura God King on an expedition and joined forces with the other 4 Peak God Kings to eliminate Kenshin. In the starry sky, he saw Kenshin fall and turn into ashes with his own eyes. Not to mention the god's body turning into powder, even the god's divinity turned into dregs and scattered in the void. He was definitely deader than dead. How could Jin Shuang believe that Kenshin had been reborn? If he didn't see Kenshin with his own eyes, he wouldn't believe it. The 7 god messengers and the 21 god kings had the same thought. Although most of them had never seen Kenshin with their own eyes. But they also didn't dare to believe that Kenshin, who was killed by the 5 emperors, could actually come back to life. Seeing the burial of heaven floating in the sky without any movement, Jin Shuang couldn't help but frown. Kenshin. You coward, do you really want me to destroy the burial of heaven and personally drag you out? Jin Shuang's patience was limited and he didn't want to waste any more time. He turned his head to look at the 7 god messengers behind him and gave them a look. The 7 god messengers understood and immediately took out their divine weapons. They accumulated violent divine power in their bodies and prepared to attack the burial of heaven. At this moment, the burial of heaven lit up with a white light. Swoosh! In the flickering light, Ji Tianqing, who was wearing a white robe with cloud patterns, appeared in the sky. At this moment, he looked no different from 3 days ago. However, he had already been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for a full 5 months. What was gratifying was that he finally refined the 4 God Kings' divinity fragments within 150 days. At the same time that his strength increased greatly, the number of divine Tao laws that he mastered also successfully broke through 500, reaching 508. Such a terrifying number was something that only 8th stage realm high-level God Kings could achieve. The quintessence fragments of the 4 God Kings gave Ji Tianqing a great harvest, greatly increasing his strength. In addition, the heaven-mending orb had also refined a few king-grade divine artifacts and hundreds of billions of resources, providing him and the 5 elements world with a huge amount of divine power. Ji Tianqing had reached the middle stage of LV4 Divine King Realm. His battle prowess had also increased by 2 times. However, he was the only one who knew all this. He stood proudly in the sky with his hands behind his back. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and his entire body exuded a majestic and domineering aura. At this moment, the world was silent. It was as if the air had frozen. The 28 divine kings and Jin Shuang all held their breaths as they stared at him. Everyone's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. All sorts of thoughts appeared in everyone's minds. It really is him, he is Kenshin. Compared to 1,000 years ago, his appearance and temperament are 80% similar. Unbelievable. Kenshin has really been reborn. Fortunately. Although he is Kenshin, his strength and aura are much weaker than before. Just as everyone's expressions were different as they stared at Ji Tianqing and observed. Ji Tianqing glanced at Jin Shuang, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sneer. Coward? Who was the one who fled in a sorry state, crying for the Azura God King to save his life? And who was the one who, in order to save his life, made his younger brother block a fatal blow for him? At this point, Ji Tianqing shook his head and said contemptuously, Jin Shuang, 1,000 years have passed, but you are still vicious and shameless. Jin Shuang was still awe-inspiring and wanted to humiliate Kenshin in front of so many God Kings. Think about it, the unparalleled Kenshin who stood at the peak of the god realm back then. Now that he had fallen to such a state, wasn't it time for him to show off? But he didn't expect that Kenshin would say his most shameful thing and poke at the eternal pain in his heart. That's right. Back then, Jin Shuang did have a younger brother from the same mother called Jin Yu. The two brothers were close and their strength was not far apart. They both worked for the Azura God King. But in the battle of the gods in outer space, Jin Shuang was heavily injured by Kenshin and was almost killed by a single blow. At the critical moment, Jin Shuang tricked his younger brother Jin Yu and blocked a fatal blow for him. In the end, Jin Shuang survived, but Jin Yu died in outer space and turned into ashes. Because of this, Jin Shuang hated Kenshin to the bone. Jin Yu's death became an eternal pain in his heart. He would never allow anyone to mention that matter, it was his taboo. But now, Ji Tianqing exposed it in front of everyone. The 20 god kings were all stunned. They looked at Jin Shuang with a subtle and strange expression. Jin Shuang was so angry that his face turned ashen. His body trembled and his whole body ignited with blood flames that soared into the sky. Kenshin! Don't you dare slander me and frame me. My younger brother Jin Yu died under your burial of Heaven Sword. Today, I will take revenge for my younger brother. I will cut you into 10,000 pieces. Jin Shuang would never admit the crime of tricking his younger brother to die for him. In his rage, he even forgot that his goal was to capture Kenshin alive. Everyone attack together and kill him. I want him to die. Cut his body into 10,000 pieces and grind his bones to dust. Jin Shuang pulled out his light blue frost divine blade. His face was sinister as he roared hysterically. The 7 god envoys and 21 god kings did not hesitate. They all let out angry roars and surrounded Ji Tianqing. Azure Yuan flowing light sword. Dragon jade blade. Xian Bing divine fist. Heaven suppressing divine palm. Star collapse. Great mystery Tao diagram, the 28 god king powerhouses all let out loud cries. They waved all kinds of king-grade divine artifacts and released divine art light shadows that covered the sky. No one dared to be careless and underestimate the enemy. They all used all their strength and used their trump cards. After all, the strong enemy they were facing was Kenshin, who was unrivaled in the god realm back then. In an instant, the heaven and earth within 50,000 miles was illuminated by dazzling divine light. The heaven and earth divine power and space in this area also became extremely chaotic. Ji Tianqing had not made a move to counterattack. The two sides' divine arts had not collided. The extremely chaotic divine Tao law suppressed this heaven and earth into ruins. Rumble, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Tens of thousands of miles of land collapsed. The clear sky also became dark clouds as if it was night. The scene at this moment was like the end of the world. Ji Tianqing held the burial of Heaven's sword and stood under the divine art light that covered the sky. He was like a small boat in a stormy sea that was about to capsize. Jin Shuang held the frost divine blade and stood outside the battle circle. He looked at the lone Ji Tianqing and laughed heartily. Ha ha ha. Kenshin, back then, His Majesty the God Emperor could kill you and turn you into ashes. Today, I can also kill you once more and grind your bones to dust. You want to return to the peak and seek revenge from His Majesty the God Emperor? Dream on. Never. Chapter 35:15. For 1,000 years, Jin Shuang had always had a regret in his heart. He wanted to personally kill Kenshin and tear him to pieces to avenge his brother Jin Yu. However, Kenshin was killed by the 5 emperors and turned into ashes. His regret and wish could never be fulfilled. However, Shadow Executioner God Emissary told him that Kenshin had been resurrected and his strength had weakened a lot. From that moment on, Jin Shuang's blood boiled and he was incomparably excited. He silently swore that this time, no matter what, he would fulfill his wish. And now, it was the best opportunity for him to fulfill his wish and personally kill Kenshin to avenge his brother. Looking at the sky full of divine technique light falling from the sky, Ji Tianqing was surrounded by 28 divine kings and was about to be smashed to pieces. Jin Shuang only felt incomparably happy and relieved. However, just as everyone's attacks were about to hit Ji Tianqing, instead, he used an unimaginable divine ability and consummate skill. Endless Sky of Chaos. Ji Tianqing, who was supposed to die without a doubt, actually disappeared into thin air. Not even an afterimage was left on the spot. His entire person had merged with the heaven and earth. Although Jin Shuang and the 28 divine kings could sense his aura, he still existed in this world. But he just disappeared. That's right, he disappeared, not turned invisible. Boom. Boom boom boom. Dozens of divine techniques that could destroy heaven and earth fiercely bombarded the ground, exploding with loud noises that shook the 9 heavens. Immediately, the mountains and rivers of 50,000 li were shattered and completely overturned. At a glance, the mountains and rivers had disappeared. In this space, only endless yellow soil and ravines were left. The sky was also covered by endless dust. Clearly, the 28 divine kings' attacks had all missed. Everyone could sense that Ji Tianqing's aura was everywhere. There was no change and he was not affected. Why did Kenshin disappear? He must have hidden. This king can still sense his aura, he is right beside us. Damn it. This must be a brilliant escape technique. It's just that we are not strong enough to see through it. Everyone, don't let down your guard. Seal this area. We can't let him escape in the chaos. Don't just stand there, let's work together and find him. If we don't kill him today, we will all die if he comes for revenge in the future. Over 20 divine kings were stunned. They whispered to each other as they searched for Ji Tianqing. Jin Shuang's expression was also very gloomy, her eyes flashing with a sharp cold light. Strange, where is he hiding? I can clearly sense that he's in this area and hasn't escaped. However, Jin Shuang had long expected that even if Kenshin's strength had fallen, he would still have hundreds of divine abilities and ultimate skills. He would definitely be extremely difficult to deal with. However, he did not expect Kenshin's methods to be so strange. Without doing anything, he suddenly disappeared. The aura was clearly nearby, but no one could find it. What sorcery was this? Time passed quietly. 10 breaths, 20 breaths, 30 breaths, everyone gave it their all and used all kinds of divine arts and techniques in an attempt to drag Ji Tianqing out. Not only did these godly monarchs scour the sky and earth in a radius of 25,000 kilometers, they even scoured a few alternate dimensions. However, in the end, they still found nothing. After 100 breaths of time, over 20 godly monarchs were at a loss. They had no choice but to expand their search area and seal off an area of 80,000 kilometers. Jin Shuang also used all kinds of methods, but to no avail. She could not help but sink into deep thought. Many godly monarchs looked at her and asked her through sound transmission, hoping that she could make a decision. Lord Commander, we've searched the area of 80,000 kilometers, but we still haven't found him. What should we do? Lord Commander, please make a decision. Hearing everyone's sound transmission, Jin Shuang frowned and shouted in a dignified tone, "Everyone, don't panic. He's only temporarily hiding and hasn't left this area. Although we still don't know what kind of crooked divine ability he's using for now, his goal is clear. However, his goal was obvious. He wanted to stall for time and make us panic. What we need to do now is to join hands and seal off this area so that he can never escape. Isn't he stalling for time? Then let's stall for time with him. In any case, we have countless reinforcements that will arrive one after another. One day, even if we have to destroy the space of 100,000 kilometers, we will still find him. Although the truth in front of everyone was that no one could do anything to Ji Tianqing. But for some reason, when everyone heard Jin Shuang's words, they did not feel depressed at all. Instead, they were excited and full of anticipation. Their morale returned to its peak. Everyone was full of confidence. They joined hands and used their divine abilities to seal off this area. Ji Tianqing merged with the world of 100,000 kilometers and hid in an invisible place. He heard everyone's reaction and Jin Shuang's words clearly. He immediately frowned and felt a little worried. Jin Shuang was right, and she hit the nail on the head. These godly monarchs could stall for time, but he could not delay any longer. Who knew what kind of unforeseen event would happen in an hour or 2 or 3 hours? Therefore, Ji Tianqing could only change his strategy. Since they are so persistent, then we can only fight a bloody battle and kill our way out of this encirclement. Thus, Ji Tianqing woke up everyone in the distorted space and time, as well as Chao Qingyu and his wife in the green jade divine ship. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! In the blink of an eye, several divine lights lit up in the sky, and 3 godly monarchs appeared. Yang, Chao Qingyu, and Lan appeared at the same time. They were all wearing mid-grade king-grade divine armors and wielding mid-grade king-grade divine artifacts. Following that, Yunyao and Ji Tianqing appeared at the same time. Yunyao was wearing the mid-grade king-grade ice moon divine armor and holding the sun and moon twin swords in both hands. She looked exceptionally holy and cold. As for Ji Ku, she was still cultivating in seclusion and was at the final juncture of breaking through to the godly king realm. Ji Tianqing did not disturb her. In addition, there was another godly king imprisoned in the 9 heavens Tenju Pagoda. The 7th stage realm godly king Bai Feng. But unfortunately, Bai Feng and Ji Tianqing had no enmity, nor did they have any relationship. Even though he had been imprisoned for so long, his willpower was still firm and he did not submit to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing could not care about him for the time being. He would deal with him later. Jin Shuang and the 28 godly kings were currently casting their arts to seal the heavens and earth. Suddenly seeing Ji Tianqing and the others appear, everyone revealed a pleasantly surprised expression as they started to discuss with sneers on their faces. Ha ha ha. Lord Commander's method is indeed useful. Kenshin couldn't hold back and took the initiative to appear. That's right. He also knows that he can't escape even if he has wings, so he might as well give it his all and fight to the death. Tisk tsk tsk. I really didn't expect that back then, Kenshin was all-powerful and could summon the wind and rain. I don't know how many heroes followed him. But now, he has actually fallen to such a miserable state, with only a few shrimp soldiers and crab generals by his side. Kenshin, you were once unparalleled under the heavens, an unparalleled supreme powerhouse. Now that things have come to this, you might as well admit defeat and surrender. At least you can have a dignified death. Why do you want to fight to the death and end up in a tragedy? Many godly kings were mocking Ji Tianqing. But Ji Tianqing was unmoved. Holding the burial of heaven sword in his hand, he roared and took the lead to attack. Kill. Chapter 35:16. Ji Tianqing took the lead and charged out. He used his full strength right from the start, using the celestial dragon tyrant body to increase his battle prowess by 6 times. He transformed into a 10,000 feet tall golden armored giant god and wielded the huge burial of heaven sword, unleashing his full strength. Rising dragon slash. He roared as he held the burial of heaven sword with both hands and slashed out 1,000 feet long golden sword light. Kaboom! Several god kings were sent flying by the sword light. The sky and earth were also split open by the sword light, revealing a 10,000 feet long rift. The pitch-black rift was like a chasm that divided the battlefield into 2 halves. Immediately after, Ji Tianqing used another ultimate skill. Omnidirectional vanishing shadows. In an instant, his body split into 4, creating 3 clones that were indistinguishable from each other. 4 Ji Tianqing appeared on the battlefield. They were all 10,000 feet tall and shone with golden light, exuding a divine aura. Immediately after, something happened that made the God King's jaws drop. The 4 Ji Tianqing swung their swords at the same time, unleashing their full strength, but using different sword Dao abilities. Sky-splitting sword. Ancestral swords. Burial of heaven sword. Celestial dragon slash. The dazzling divine sword light, carrying more than 100 divine Dao laws, slashed at the surrounding God Kings. The God Kings were all stunned. They all revealed expressions of shock and fear as they cried out. What's going on? There are 4 Kenshin. Cloning technique. This must be a cloning technique. Everyone, be careful. Don't panic. Those 4 clones might be fake. We have to find the real Kenshin. Don't just stand there. Everyone, work together to resist. Although more than 20 God Kings were panicking, they did not panic. However, they didn't lose their composure. Instead, they unleashed their ultimate skills and joined forces to block the sword light that filled the sky. Bam! 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 Rumble! The sky-blotting Abhijna clashed with the sky-blotting sword Qi, resulting in a deafening explosion that shook the entire universe. Without a doubt, all the sword lights in the sky were shattered. No matter how great Ji Tianqing's capabilities were, it was also hard for him to match 28 Divine King powerhouses. After the God Kings blocked Ji Tianqing's attack, they split into several groups and joined forces to attack him and his 3 clones. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yank, Chao Qingyu, Lan, Er, and Yun Yao all rushed over and started attacking valiantly. 8 Directional Holy Light Slash. Blue Sky Falling Sword Rain. Empty Valley Bilan. Great Universe Sword. The 4 of them used their full strength and used their divine abilities and ultimate skills to attack the surrounding God King powerhouses. Many God Kings had no choice but to give up on surrounding Ji Tianqing and focus on fending off the attacks of Yank and the others. The pressure on Ji Tianqing was greatly reduced. He hurriedly controlled his 3 avatars to spread out and attack the various God Kings. However, Jin Shuang, who had been watching from the sidelines and controlling the overall situation, couldn't help but join the battle. He wasn't confused by the 3 avatars. After carefully observing for a moment, he found Ji Tianqing's true body. There was no other way. Ji Tianqing hadn't reached the peak of the God King realm, and he hadn't cultivated 10 directional absolute shadows to perfection. There was still a huge difference between his true body and his avatars. After all, his avatars only had half of his battle prowess. A high God King like Jin Shuang had rich battle experience and sharp eyes. Of course, he could tell. Kenshin, die. Jin Shuang rushed into the battlefield, ignoring the 3 avatars. He waved his Frost Divine Blade and charged straight at Ji Tianqing. Heavenly Blade Frost. Jin Shuang shouted angrily. He held his blade with both hands and slashed out 9 blade lights that could split heaven and earth. The 9 blade lights contained more than 180 laws. They firmly locked onto Ji Tianqing's divine soul aura, making it impossible for him to dodge. Before the blade lights arrived, a bone-chilling cold air and a sharp and domineering blade intent enveloped Ji Tianqing. He could only give up on attacking the other God Kings and block Jin Shuang's attack with all his strength. Daylight Sword. Ji Tianqing held the Burial of Heaven sword with both hands and stabbed out with all his strength. A dense light dot flashed in front of him. A quarter of an instant later, that light appeared 100 miles away and completely exploded. The sacred golden sword light exploded into a golden halo that was a few hundred miles wide. It was as dazzling as the sun. Boom boom boom. The sacred golden ball of light blocked the 9-blade lights. It exploded with an earth-shattering sound and a destructive shockwave. However, the daylight sword collapsed on the spot, exploding into countless fragments of divine light. However, only 6 of the 9 ice-blue frost blades were shattered. There were still 3 blade lights that struck Ji Tianqing. Bang bang bang. With a muffled sound, the 3,000-meter-tall Ji Tianqing was sent flying by the blade lights. Several cracks appeared on his divine power shield. He flew out a full 300 miles before he could disperse the terrifying impact and stabilize himself in the sky. After a few breaths, he calmed down his rampaging god power and quickly repaired his divine power shield. This scene made Jin Shuang's spirit rise as he laughed complacently. Ha ha ha, your strength has indeed dropped too much. Even I can't block it. Since that's the case, you have no chance of survival. Today, you will be buried here. Before this, Jin Shuang had only heard the Shadow Executioner's report that Kenshin's strength had dropped a lot. Jin Shuang only dared to believe 60% of it. He still had some vigilance in his heart. Now, he personally verified Ji Tianqing's strength. He was even more certain that the Shadow Executioner did not lie to him. His confidence immediately soared and his attacks became even more ferocious. He attacked Ji Tianqing without holding back. The other 20 god kings also saw Ji Tianqing being sent flying by Jin Shuang. Everyone was relieved and cheered in surprise. After all, they had all heard of Kenshin's glorious battle achievements. They instinctively feared and respected the unparalleled Kenshin. But now it was different. Kenshin had become a soft persimmon. He could not even beat Jin Shuang. Everyone saw hope. Their morale soared and they attacked Ji Tianqing's clones, Yank and the others even more ferociously. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Bang bang bang. Immediately, the 28 god kings used all their strength and used all kinds of divine abilities to envelop the heaven and earth. The dazzling 5-colored divine light covered the radiance of the scorching sun, causing the area to become chaotic. Ji Tianqing's 3 clones were quickly beaten back, and countless cracks and gaps appeared on their bodies. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and the others also began to be injured and bleeding. They fell into a passive and dangerous situation. As for Ji Tianqing, Jin Shuang only stared at him and attacked fiercely. He suppressed him until he kept retreating. He could only try to deal with him. There was no other way. He was only a 4th-level god king. And Jin Shuang was an 8th-level god king who had been famous for many years. The difference in strength between the two was not small. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing had mastered all kinds of skills. That was why he could barely hold on and not be defeated. But even so, he was still in a dangerous situation. His divine power was severely depleted and he was soon injured. There was a huge disparity in the number of people on both sides. Now that Ji Tianqing and the others were at a disadvantage, defeat was a matter of time. Chapter 35:17. Unknowingly, a quarter of an hour passed. Ji Tianqing and the rest had already exchanged a few thousand blows with the god kings led by Jin Shuang. Everyone's situation was even more dangerous, and their injuries were even worse. Ji Tianqing's 3 clones had already been surrounded by the god kings and were defeated on the spot. Yunyao had the mid-king level frost moon divine armor and the dual swords of sun and moon. Even if she was slightly weaker, she could at least protect herself, and her injuries were relatively light. However, Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lan Er's injuries were more severe, and they looked rather wretched. Their armors were shattered, and they were bathed in blood. Their robes and hair were in a mess, and their strength had greatly decreased. Especially Lan Er. Not only did she have more than 40 wounds on her body, but her left arm had also been cut off. Chao Qingyu was so angry that his eyes were about to pop out. He tried his best to protect Lan Er, but it was to no avail. Instead, he made his injuries worse. Yang's defense was strong, but his body was too big, and speed was not his forte. When he was surrounded by 7 or 8 god kings, he became a live target, and at the same time, he was Chao Qingyu and the rest's protective wall. He suffered the most attacks and injuries. There were more than 100 wounds all over his body. Fortunately, he had thick skin and strong willpower, which allowed him to last until now. However, this could not go on. At most, in another quarter of an hour, he would be completely defeated and killed on the spot. Ji Tianqing's injuries were not light either. His white robe was dyed gold by the god's blood, and his hair was disheveled. He was in a sorry state. Although his combat strength was very strong, Jin Shuang was even stronger. Not only did he have to contend with Jin Shuang, but he also had to protect Yun Yao. The situation was too dangerous. He did not want Yun Yao to be fatally injured. It seemed that everyone could not hold on any longer. Especially Lan, and Chao Qingyu. If they exchanged a few hundred more blows, they might be killed. Ji Tianqing was anxious. He was prepared to use the heaven-destroying sword formation to relieve everyone's pressure. However, if he did that, the pressure would be on him. The heaven-vanquishing sword formation could suppress the strength of the god kings and trap them here. But with over 20 god kings working together, under Jin Shuang's leadership, it was very easy to break through the heavenly punishment sword formation. Once the heaven-destroying sword formation was forcefully destroyed, Ji Tianqing would suffer from the backlash of the divine formation and be severely injured. Therefore, the heaven-destroying sword formation could be considered a double-edged sword. Without sufficient confidence, it could not be used easily. At this moment, Ji Tianqing suddenly heard a clear female voice in his mind. "Brother Tianqing, let me help you." The sudden voice caused Ji Tianqing to be stunned for a moment. Then, he realized that it was Ji Ku's voice. He was very surprised. He hurriedly used his soul consciousness to ask, "Ku, you've finished your seclusion? Have you successfully broken through?" "Yes." Ji Ku simply responded with a sound of acknowledgement. In the next moment, she opened the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and appeared in front of Ji Tianqing. If it were anyone else, they could only wait for Ji Tianqing to open the divine pagoda before they could leave the distorted spacetime. But Ji Ku was different. She could enter and exit the divine pagoda at any time. After all, she was the true master of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. Swoosh! Ji Ku, dressed in red, appeared beside Ji Tianqing. At this moment, she had a subtle change compared to before. Her height had increased by a bit, and her face was even more beautiful. She was also filled with the unique temperament of the demon clan. In other words, she looked like a beautiful and noble fire phoenix, full of hot and proud. And her strength had successfully broken through to the first level of the God King realm. Her strength had increased by several times. Ji Tianqing blocked Jin Shuang's fierce attacks while sizing up Ji Ku. Seeing Ji Ku's change, he sighed with joy. A long time ago, I thought that Yao Yao would break through to the God King realm first. I didn't expect you to catch up before her. Ji Ku only smiled and nodded. She did not say anything. Her sharp gaze swept across the entire place. Soon, she saw the situation clearly. Seeing that everyone was severely injured, her heart jumped, and her brows furrowed tightly. "Brother Tianqing, I'll go help them. You hold on." Ji Ku reminded him through voice transmission before she teleported to Lan Er's side. Lan Er's injuries were the most severe. Her strength was the weakest, and she could not fight anymore. Ji Ku took the mid-grade king-tier divine sword from her hand and said, "Lan, quickly go into seclusion to heal your injuries. Leave this to us." Lan did not refuse. Ji Ku hurriedly cast a spell and put her into the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda. Next, Ji Ke waved her divine sword and launched a counterattack against the surrounding god kings. Holy flames burning the heavens. Nirvana's wrath. Divine phoenix spreading wings. Ji Ke, who had just broken through to the god king realm, had the divine power in her body surging violently. She was worried that she would not be able to suppress the rampaging divine power. Therefore, she released all of it and used the divine phoenix unique skill. Instantly, the divine sword in her hand released a sky full of holy flames. Endless Nirvana's flames splashed out. Swoosh! Swoosh! The few god kings in the surroundings were already heavily injured to begin with. Ji Ke's sudden appearance and use such an earth-shattering Phoenix Clan divine ability caught the few divine kings off guard. In the blink of an eye, 4 god kings were engulfed by the holy flames and Nirvana's flames. Their bodies were charred black, and they were close to being crippled. The god kings screamed in pain and fled the battlefield in a sorry state. They consumed divine pills to heal their injuries. Although Ji Ke was only a first heaven realm lower level god king. The weakest of the god kings was a 5th heaven realm god king. However, the divine phoenix unique skill was so domineering. Only upper level god kings could withstand the holy flames and Nirvana's flames. As for lower level god kings and middle level god kings, they could only dodge if they did not have special defensive abilities or divine weapons. The most troublesome thing was that after being burned by the holy flames and Nirvana's flames, they would need special high-grade divine pills to heal. Moreover, the recovery process was extremely slow. After the god kings escaped from the battlefield, even if they consumed divine pills to suppress their injuries, it was useless. In this way, they were considered to be crippled. They could no longer fight and kill. 3 divine messengers saw Ji Ke's outstanding performance and terrifying destructive power. They quickly rushed over to attack her. These 3 divine messengers were 7th heaven realm upper level god kings. The holy flames and Nirvana's flames did not pose much of a threat to them. Even though Ji Ke used all her strength to execute her unique skill, she was unable to hurt them. Instead, she was forced to retreat. Soon, she was injured. Just like that, another 100 breaths of time passed. Chao Qingyu's injuries were too severe. Finally, he could not hold on any longer. Ji Tianqing quickly rushed over. Before he was killed, he kept him into the distorted space. After another 30 breaths of time, Yank finally could not hold on any longer. There was not a single part of his body that was intact. His body was filled with wounds and bloody holes. He was almost beaten into a sieve. Helpless, Ji Tianqing could only keep him into the distorted space and let him go into seclusion to heal his injuries. On the battlefield, only Ji Tianqing, Ji Ke, and Yun Yao were left. Moreover, the 3 of them had suffered heavy injuries. Their abilities had decreased greatly. On the other hand, Jin Shuang's side still had 22 people. Chapter 35:18. At this point, the battle stopped for a moment. Jin Shuang and the 21 godly kings sealed off an area of 50,000 miles, forming a huge encirclement. Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ke gathered together and fought side by side. But at this point, the difference in numbers between the 2 sides was too great. They were outnumbered, and the disparity was too great. Furthermore, Ji Tianqing and the other 2's cultivation realms were much lower than the other parties. No matter what, the 3 of them could not defeat more than 20 godly kings. It was even difficult for them to escape. It was very likely that they would lose their lives here. It was a hopeless situation. This was a true hopeless situation. What should we do? At this point, we can only think of ways to escape. Tianqing, we can only take revenge in the future. Do you have a way to escape? Ji Ke and Yun Yao were frowning. Their bodies were covered in blood, and they looked very tragic. Ji Tianqing nodded and said in a serious tone, if we have no other choice, we can use the godly pagoda to escape. I still have a trump card that I haven't used. However, I want to wait a little longer. There's something that I have to wait for an answer to. Ji Ko was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully, Big Brother Tianqing, what is it? She had been cultivating in seclusion and did not know much about the situation in the outside world. Yin Yao knew a little and asked through voice transmission, Tianqing, you mean, the ancient clans? Yes. Ji Tianqing nodded and explained through voice transmission, the reason why I exposed my identity in advance is to let the ancient clans see hope and not submit to the Azura God Emperor. Although I have some guesses and deductions about what the ancient clans will do, I'm only 60 to 70% sure. Only by waiting for an answer can I decide whether to rely on the ancient clans in the future. Yun Yao and Ji Ku immediately understood. Brother Tianqing, do you mean that the people from the primordial clan will come? Even if they really come, they won't help us, right? After all, our forces are still very weak. It's impossible for them to go against Emperor God Xiu Luo for us. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said meaningfully, it might not be blatant. Yun Yao and Ji Ku frowned, not quite understanding what he meant. At this time, Jin Shuang and the 21 God Kings also took the opportunity to adjust their breathing. Although they were all injured, they had regained their vigor and fighting spirit. Kenshin, accept your fate. Don't put up any more resistance. Die. The one who kills the Kenshin will be rewarded handsomely by the God Emperor. Jin Shuang and the other divine envoys all brandished their swords and shouted loudly. Under their lead, the many God Kings brandished their weapons and launched an attack with murderous intent. Swoosh! Swoosh! Swish! 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 In the blink of an eye, those two God Kings were heavily injured. Bloody holes appeared in their chests, and they screamed as they flew back. The sudden unforeseen event woke up the nearby 3 God Kings. They thought that Ji Tianqing had taken the opportunity to launch a sneak attack and hurriedly rushed over to help. However, before they could arrive, the 4 black-robed God Kings hid and fled the battlefield. Almost at the same time. On the southeast battlefield, there were also 3 God King powerhouses dressed in silver armor and wearing helmets. They quietly approached. Although, on the surface, one couldn't tell whether they were men or women. However, their eyes were deep and tranquil. They were obviously old men. Whoosh! Whoosh! They quietly approached the 2 God Kings and suddenly attacked, heavily injuring those 2 God Kings. Their bodies were covered in blood as they smashed into the ruins. After their attack succeeded, they didn't stay and immediately fled the battlefield, hiding far away. The nearby God Kings heard the screams and cries for help and hurriedly rushed over to help. However, they didn't even see a shadow. Following that, the same scene played out in the southwest and south of the battlefield. The other 2 groups of oddly dressed God Kings also covered their faces and quietly attacked the God Kings under Jin Shuang. Just like that, including the 7 divine envoys, 11 of the 21 God Kings were heavily injured and unable to continue fighting. Jin Shuang and the other 11 God Kings were forced into a panic. They went everywhere to help, but they were always one step behind. Such a strange situation made Jin Shuang abnormally angry. She angrily roared. Kenshin. For better or for worse, you were once an unparalleled sovereign. How can you be so despicable and sinister? What kind of man are you to hide in the dark and attack? If you have the ability, come out and fight with this seat. Chapter 35:19. It was impossible to fight a duel. Although Jin Shuang was stronger than Ji Tianqing and had full confidence in winning, he was not stupid. However, he wasn't that stupid and didn't want to waste any more time. As long as Ji Tianqing dared to show himself, he would bring the 10 divine kings and attack him to death. However, Jin Shuang's voice echoed in the sky. Tens of thousands of li of heaven and earth were silent. Ji Tianqing still hid and did not show himself. Jin Shuang became even more angry and cursed loudly, Kenshin, you were so confident and arrogant in the past. Weren't you invincible in the god realm? How come you become a coward and can't even beat a nobody like me? Where's your confidence and pride? Where's your face? Hiding in such humiliation, even if you come back from the dead, what's the point? The great Kenshin can only rely on sneak attacks to defeat a divine king weaker than you. Like muffled thunder, rolling waves of sound echoed in the sky. But Ji Tianqing did not show himself. The other 10 divine kings frowned and hesitated, looking like they wanted to say something but stopped. Finally, a divine emissary gathered his courage and said, Lord Commander, the ones who attacked them just now should not be Kenshin. Both the east and west were attacked at the same time, and there were several people who attacked them, all wearing masks. Jin Shuang was stunned for a moment, his face became very ugly and he angrily shouted, Shut up. Do you think I don't know this? I said this to provoke Kenshin to show himself. What do you know? The divine emissary shrunk his neck after being scolded, he quickly bowed and apologized, retreated to the side and did not dare to speak again. Jin Shuang's face was gloomy and his brows were tightly knitted. He silently calculated in his heart, damn it, someone is secretly helping Kenshin. Who could it be? Currently, Kenshin's power is still very weak, he only has a few followers. Which bastard dares to secretly help him? Jin Shuang frowned and thought for a moment, a light flashed in his mind and he suddenly thought of something. Could it be those people from the ancient clans? That's right. Only the various large ancient clans would have so many God King experts. But back then, the Kenshin had fought all over the blessed enclaves and formed a deep grudge with the ancient clans. Those ancient clans have all submitted to His Majesty the God Emperor. Why would they help the Kenshin? Jin Shuang did not understand, nor did she dare to confirm the answer. Meanwhile, Ji Tianqing had merged with 200,000 miles of heaven and earth, but he could see everything that was happening in this area clearly. In this period of time just now, there were 5 groups of divine king powerhouses that infiltrated the battlefield from all directions. There were close to 20 of them, and they silently ambushed those divine kings, heavily injuring 11 of them, causing Jin Shuang's side's power to fall greatly. Ji Tianqing observed in secret, observing very carefully. Even though those god kings were all wearing masks that hid their physical features and faces, they were still able to see the god kings. However, through some details, Ji Tianqing made a preliminary judgment about the identities of the 5 groups of god kings. At this moment, Jin Shuang and the 10 divine kings gathered together, not daring to scatter. The 5 groups of masked divine king powerhouses also hid at the edge of the battlefield, no longer acting rashly. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianqing secretly sent a voice transmission, inquiring about the identities of those divine king powerhouses. He first asked about the group of divine king powerhouses in the north wearing skull masks. His divine sense voice transmission was clearly transmitted into the minds of those 4 divine kings. Thank you for your help. If I'm not wrong, you should be experts of the Phoenix clan, right? The 4 divine kings of the Phoenix clan who were wearing skull masks had concealed their presence and were hiding deep underground. They originally thought that they were hidden enough that no one would be able to discover them. Suddenly, Ji Tianqing's voice sounded in their minds, causing their bodies to stiffen, and their hearts to surge with deep shock and reverence. After a moment of silence, the leading divine king said in a low voice, as expected of the Kenshin. To be able to discover us under such circumstances, it's truly admirable. The other party's words clearly tacitly acknowledged the identity of the Phoenix clan. Ji Tianqing's tone eased up a lot and said, Divine Phoenix clan leader, how have you been? The leading divine Phoenix clan leader was stunned for a moment, and said with a rather strange tone, Kenshin, you long guessed that we would come to help you, that's why you deliberately stalled for time and hid in the dark, right? Ji Tianqing said with a faint smile, sort of. Fortunately, you didn't disappoint me in the end. It wasn't in vain for me to help you revise the Phoenix clan's inheritance manual back then. 1,000 years ago, Ji Tianqing indeed went to the divine Phoenix Grotto heaven and trampled all over the Phoenix clan's geniuses and powerhouses. Even the divine Phoenix clan leader only lasted 100 moves under his hands before being defeated regretfully. But Kenshin had no enmity with the Phoenix clan. The reason why he came to challenge them was also with the intention of exchanging pointers and learning. After the great battle of exchanging pointers, Kenshin pointed out the flaws of the Phoenix clan's inheritance manual and helped the Phoenix clan revise and improve the inheritance cultivation method. Therefore, the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven and Kenshin could not be considered friends, but they had a deep relationship. The divine Phoenix clan leader fell silent for a moment before asking through voice transmission, "Kenshin, is Bai Feng still alive?" Ji Tianqing answered, "Of course." The divine Phoenix clan leader heaved a sigh of relief. He said through voice transmission, "Although Bai Feng's views are a little different from ours, he is still an elite genius of the Phoenix clan." Ji Tianqing smiled and asked, "So, you brought people to help me today because you want to take the opportunity to bring Bai Feng back?" The divine Phoenix clan leader hurriedly explained, "Of course not. I just want to confirm if he is still alive. If you are willing to keep him by your side, that is his blessing. Of course, as long as he does not offend you, I hope that you can still take care of him for the sake of the Phoenix clan." "No problem," Ji Tianqing agreed without hesitation. In any case, he did not plan to let Bai Feng go in the first place. He wanted to keep him by his side for a period of time and try to subdue him. With a 7th-level Divine King Realm bodyguard, it would be much more convenient for him to do anything. Both parties fell silent for a while. The Divine Phoenix clan leader was a little hesitant, but he still made up his mind. He said through voice transmission, "Kenshin, we are here to help you, but we cannot reveal our identities yet. I hope that you can keep this a secret. When you find an opportunity later, escape to the Xiaolong region as soon as possible. When the time is right, you will come back again, right?" It was obvious that this was what the Divine Phoenix clan leader was most concerned about. All the ancient clans felt that Kenshin and the Azura God Emperor were mortal enemies. Now that such a huge commotion had happened, it was to declare war on the Azura God Emperor. All the ancient clans saw hope. They wanted Kenshin to lead them against the Azura God Emperor. If Kenshin came back, it meant that they were not wrong. They were willing to wait. If Kenshin said that he would not come back or that he was afraid, they could only give up. After asking this question, the Divine Phoenix clan leader waited anxiously for an answer. He was afraid of hearing an answer like, "Give up," or "Hide." He was also afraid that after enduring for 1,000 years, he would be disappointed. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate at all. He replied firmly, "Of course I will come back. That day will come very soon. I will not make you wait for too long." "You came to help me this time to ask for 2 answers." He already had the first answer. "As for the second question, I can answer you clearly. Wait patiently, I will be back. This dark era will definitely come to an end." These few sentences of Ji Tianqing's all touched the bottom of Lan Wuji's heart. After getting a positive answer, he didn't ask any more questions. He immediately said in a serious tone, "All right, I believe you. When you return, the Lan clan will definitely help you with all our might." Ji Tianqing didn't say anything else. He contacted the few god kings in the southwest via voice transmission. Those were 4 god kings wearing dark golden armor and helmets. They were covered from head to toe. Even their eyes weren't exposed. They relied entirely on their divine senses to investigate everything around them. Of course, to deities, divine senses were always more useful than eyes. Even though they covered their faces tightly, Ji Tianqing was still able to identify them. "Brothers of the War God clan, how have you been?" Ji Tianqing's tone carried a smile as it transmitted into the minds of the 4 golden-armored God Kings. Those 4 God Kings were also stunned for a moment. Immediately, they reacted. Their emotions fluctuated intensely, and they were rather excited. "Kenshin. It's really you. Ha ha ha. I already said several hundred years ago that Kenshin wouldn't die so easily. He must have faked his death. But they didn't believe me and even said that my brain was flooded with water. Reality has proven that I'm the wisest person. Kenshin, oh Kenshin, back then, you tortured us miserably. Now that you've returned, why don't you go to the fighting grotto heaven to find us? You should at least let us beat you up to vent our anger." The 4 God Kings of the War God clan were all masculine and domineering iron-blooded men. Their styles were more boorish. Even though they were the clan leader, protector, and elder of the War God clan, they were all of the same generation as Kenshin and addressed him as brothers. Back then, Ji Tianqing stayed in the fighting grotto heaven for a relatively long time. It was a full 3 months. Almost every day, there were War God clan disciples challenging him. Both sides would spar. The War God clan was the most hot-blooded and warlike. Furthermore, they were all natural battle maniacs. The innate divine abilities they inherited were also very special. Although Kenshin defeated all the War God clan powerhouses, he also won the friendship and respect of the War God clan. At the same time, he also absorbed many advantages from the War God clan's innate divine abilities and added them into his own divine abilities. Hearing the voices of those few God Kings, Ji Tianqing recalled the days back then in the fighting grotto heaven. He could not help revealing a smile and said in a playful tone, "Brothers, if there's a chance in the future, I'll go to the fighting grotto heaven again to find you all to spar. But very unfortunately, it's definitely not today. I'm very gratified that you all can come and help. Also, please rest assured, I'll be back very soon. I definitely won't make you all wait too long." Ji Tianqing did not exchange pleasantries with them and went straight to the point. The 4 War God clan's God Kings immediately felt their blood boil. Their fighting spirit soared as they repeatedly cheered. "Good, we were waiting for you to say this. A gentleman's word cannot be taken back. We'll wait for you to come back. We've already been bored for 1,000 years, waiting for you to come back and overturn this dark world, stirring up a shocking storm again. The 8,000 men of the War God clan are ready and waiting for you to come back. We'll fight side by side." Ji Tianqing smiled slightly, somewhat moved in his heart. Interacting with that bunch of boorish fellows of the War God clan was always very simple and down-to-earth. Afterward, he contacted the 2 groups of God King experts in the south. One of the groups had 5 God Kings, all dressed in black and masked. They appeared to be exceptionally cautious. Seeing their secretive and cautious appearances, Ji Tianqing could not help but laugh. "Jiang Chuyun, even if you all put on a meticulous disguise and cover yourself up tightly, your cautious nature is just too obvious." A slightly mocking voice rang out in the minds of the masked God Kings. The 5 of them were stunned. The leader, the black-robed God King, was even more embarrassed and ashamed. "Senior Kenshin, previously in the God Induction Grotto Heaven, we had no choice. Please be magnanimous." The other 2 black-robed God Kings also spoke up. "Master, although we are only your in-name disciples, we will never forget your kindness to the Jiang clan. Master, please forgive us for our previous disrespect." That was just a temporary measure. Ji Tianqing did not waste time with them. He directly asked, "How's Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing's situation?" Jiang Chuyun hurriedly replied, "Senior Kenshin, please be at ease. Our clan is doing our best to save Jiang Tianqing. He will recover in at most 10 years. As for Jiang Tianyi, in name, I punished him to reflect on his mistakes behind closed doors, but in reality, I taught him the Jiang clan's secret arts in hopes that he can improve further. Book Guest House Reading Website. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.